Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means this week? We're back to reading. I'm super excited about this because we are nearing the end of Warrior's Heart. We are reading 3 chapters tonight, and then we just have 3 left. Really, really hard to believe that we are creeping up on the end of the story. And I really need to get my butt in gear and finish working on the next one. But here we are. And I am super excited to be reading with you guys again this evening because I have really enjoyed not only reading with you, but also spending time with you as I update and rework all of these stories. It's been a challenge, but it's also been really inspiring. There we go, that's the right word. I had to think a second. It's been a day my brain's a little fried. But we're here. Give me just 1 second while I fix something. Okay. Sorry, I was changing the color balance on my camera. Anyway, I hope everyone is having an awesome evening. It is the middle of the week, which means we have, for me at least, we have 2 more work days. And then I have a weekend. I really like that. And I hope that you guys are having a good and productive week and that you're doing well. Like I said, it's been a bit of a crazy day for me, but I'm really glad to be here with you all this evening and to be reading a little bit. I really enjoy that. I find it to be relaxing, even if the content itself is not necessarily relaxing. But just bear with me because voices tend to wreck me. Alrighty. Get everything moved around over here. Okay. Here. There we go. Sorry, I was just checking something real quick. It's been a lot of the hour or so leading up to stream, doing all my posting around, getting things set up so that I'm ready to go. And here I am moving things around. Anyway, here we are. Making sure I have the right screen up so that I can read. Yeah, like I said, it's been a bit of a day. Not a bad way, just busy. Oh man, this is gonna be a challenge because I feel like I haven't read in almost a month, but I know that's not true. I know that's not true because I read 2 weeks ago. Right. We are back to reading A Warrior's Heart, starting with chapter 23, and we will be reading through chapter 25 this evening. Chapter 23. The mic a little bit closer. There we go. Rhenius rose with the sun. He always had, but this time he wasn't the first. The old swordsman was already on the porch, a pot of tea steaming beside him. Neither said much at first. Men who had trained most of their lives didn't need to. They sipped in silence as the mist over the coastal trees began to lift. "I'd like to study with you," Rhenius said at last. The old swordsman didn't answer right away. He watched him for a long moment over the rim of his teacup. "You already are," he replied, a faint smile in his voice. "But we'll make it official." They moved to the circle without ceremony. No vows, no rites, just the rhythm of 2 blades beginning to speak the same language. Rhenius adopted the guard stance he remembered from Coruscant, the one that still echoed in his bones after that strange duel. His bokken felt solid in his grip, but not yet natural. The swordsman circled him, adjusting a foot, tapping the back of his hand with a single finger to correct his wrist. Again, he said. And so they began. Hello, eyeliner. Welcome in. Baron stirred only once. When the wind shifted and she caught the scent of tea, it was oddly comforting, familiar in a way she hadn't expected. She dressed slowly, her movements unhurried, almost meditative. Her limbs still ached faintly, and the scarred tissue on her right knee pulled when she stood. But she didn't wince. She just breathed through it. Every motion, her tunic's fastening, the braids she wove into her hair, the way she clipped her saber back into place on the back of her belt felt heavier this morning. She was still trying to absorb what had happened the night before. The quiet conversation, the firelight, the embrace, that word, grandfather. She wasn't sure she fully believed it yet. By the time she stepped out into the morning sun, Rhaenys was already deep in the flow of a sparring match. The blades didn't clash with brute force, they whispered and danced, the sound of polished wood against polished wood rising in sharp, deliberate notes. She paused at the edge of the porch, watching. The swordmaster flowed easily, testing Rhaenys, pressing him, not to humiliate, but to measure. Rhaenys rolled to his right, narrowly avoiding a strike, and came up again, his guard firm. Baron's lips curved faintly. He was doing well. But she didn't linger. Instead, she moved towards the stream below the circle, the dew still heavy in the grass. She dropped carefully to her knees and her spine straight and rested her hands in her lap. Her breath was quiet and slow. She didn't reach for the force yet. Not quite. She just needed to be. From the circle above, Rhaenys caught sight of her and lifted a hand in signal. The spar halted. "Are you all right this morning, Baron?" he called. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking up towards him. A breath escaped her lips. "Lek," she said, and then she paused. Just a lot to take in. Her voice was quieter than usual, and she hadn't noticed the Mandoa that slipped out until it was already gone. She glanced towards the swordmaster who was watching her now, but not unkindly. Her gaze was softer than it had been yesterday, but her eyes still carried the weight of something unsettled. Rhaenys dipped his chin in understanding, lowering his bokken for a moment as he stepped lightly out of the circle. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head faintly. "Not yet. Just need to stretch, clear my head." Then more quietly, her voice almost unsure. "But thank you for asking." After a moment, the old swordman motioned for Rhaenys to step aside, his palm up in silent invitation. "Come up," he said, looking towards Meryn. "Sometimes working on the form can be a meditation of its own. It clears the head." Her lips quirked faintly, and she exhaled through her nose as she slowly stood. Her knee twinged, but she didn't let it show. Not this time. Her steps were careful, deliberate as she crossed the soft grass towards the training circle. She still wasn't sure why she'd come on this journey, but last night had changed something. She bowed at the circle's edge, first to the swordmaster, and then stepped inside to the circle's boundary. Her saber fell easily into her hand, its shape now as familiar as it was a memory. The black cord orange blade hissed to life in its training setting, dimmer, non-lethal, but no less real in her hands. He circled her once, nodding approvingly. "Turn your body sideways. Let your dominant hand guide the blade. Hook the other behind your back." She hesitated, and then obeyed, the movement smooth despite the stiffness in her knee. "I was never fond of a two-handed grip," she admitted softly. "I was trained to fight single-handed. Most of my techniques come from close-quarters combat. Mando hand-to-hand, knife work, and Jedi blade work." "Unusual is good," he murmured. "It makes you unpredictable." His hand gently corrected her posture. Her shoulder dropped a little. Her heel shifted back. With every adjustment, she settled deeper into her breath, her mind quieting. With her eyes closed, she drew a slow diagonal slash toward an imaginary opponent's knee. Her left knee, the one that had nearly shattered. Her lips tightened. Rhaenys knelt just outside the circle, watching silently as the swordsman moved beside her. "Angle forward slightly when you guard," he said. "Let your opponent believe you intend a thrust. When they move, step inward. Take their balance from them." She moved again, This time she saw the flash of armor in her mind, a cord tangling around her wrist, the crush of stone and moss beneath her, the snap of the shuriken as it punched through her knee. Her breathing faltered. The next strike came slower, and she barely brushed the imaginary blade aside. Fingers clenched around the hilt. Well done, her grandfather said quietly. He didn't comment on the slip, only guided her into the next stance. Now, watch. He demonstrated smoothly, disarming with a twist of the hips and a pivot of the foot. His hands moved like water, drawing invisible lines through the air. She watched, nodding slowly, and then stepped into the motion herself. Her first attempt was cautious, but by the second, something clicked. Very useful, she said. Then her voice shifted. What if they turned my own weapon against me? Like a shuriken. He looked over at her, catching the weight behind her words. Thrown at you? I threw it first, she said, after a beat. He pulled it out and drove it into my knee. Her voice cracked on knee, and she looked away. His gaze didn't waver. Then you were restrained. She nodded once. Solid, which means to stand in accord. There was silence save for the rustle of sea wind in the trees. The swordmaster stepped closer, his eyes gentle now. And it wasn't your failure, only circumstance. You survived. She drew in a shaking breath, nodded again, and returned to the stance. The blade hummed low between them. Hold, he said, gently. Just breathe. She did. Let it go. She tried. He circled her again, his voice like the tide. There will always be things beyond your control, Marin, especially in battle. But if you let the ghosts of those moments follow you into the next fight, you'll die, she finished quietly. I know. But the voice in her head wasn't his. It was Ethan's. Furious and protective. You should have told someone. You could have died out there. And Jared when he carried her home. I've got you. I'm not letting go. And Callista, the silence of her healing hands. She blinked against the sting in her eyes and drew another breath. Her grip on the saber relaxed. Good, her grandfather said, sensing the shift even if he didn't have the force. Again. Her cheeks flushed again at the soft rebuke, and she dipped her head, ashamed not of the pain, but of the fear it had left behind. Her knee still throbbed faintly beneath the wraps, and it would for some time. But pain was something she could manage. Shame was harder. Good evening, Lord. Welcome in. I see you. How is everybody tonight? I'm gonna take a stretch. Ooh, shoulder is a little cranky. Please feel free to play with the channel points. That's why they are there. Right. Oh man. Just because I'm paying attention. Also, if you guys have noticed, I have replaced the little chat cat that was down in the my bottom left of my screen. Was having some issues with it on the last stream, so I have removed it for the time being. I suspect that it is no longer working, so I will have to find something else to put there. But for now, I've got my Twitch avatar hanging out there. So, would love to know if you guys have any suggestions. I do like having an interactive channel pet over there, but like I said, I don't know if I can get the other one to work again. Maybe. We'll find out. He didn't press her, just stepped back, watching. Release all thought, he said instead, gently adjusting her shoulders with a finger or two. Sometimes, especially for those like you, working through a kata, one you know by heart, can serve as meditation. Your flow will tell you more than silence ever could. She exhaled slowly, nodding. She had learned that once too, years ago, in the heat of battle, and again in recovery when her muscles still trembled from exertion and breath came ragged through bruised ribs. She'd built this saber on Tanagas under Ethan's silent gaze, his hands hovering nearby but never interfering. The components he had found in the shrine. The blade had flared to life in flickering orange, and she'd known then that it was hers. She thumbed the saber's setting to low power once more. The orange blade extended again with a quiet snap hiss. "Hold your stance," her grandfather said, stepping beside her with a wooden practice blade. "Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Hold your blade still. Let your exhale take your anxiety with it." She did, slowly. Her grip flexed on the hilt, fingertips gliding along the smooth casing, black, silver, and orange, meant for a single hand, meant for her. Her movements flowed by memory alone, began cycling slowly through Form 4. "Good," he said softly, watching her ease into the third transition. Flow with it. She lost herself in it, one stance, then the next. Each movement had a rhythm, each exhale a quiet release. Pain gave way to breath, regret to focus. Her mind eventually stilled. When she reached the fifth stance, something finally loosened inside her chest. The swordmaster turned towards Rhenius now, gesturing. Rhenius stepped into the circle without a word, taking his place opposite them in silence. He mirrored the guard stance, his own wooden boken balanced perfectly in his grip. The master's voice lowered. "Now, do you wish to learn this style?" Marin's eyes opened slightly, surprised. She met Rhenius' gaze and then bowed her head in quiet respect. "I would be honored, Terenia." For those of you who don't know, that's a word that I came up with for Atashir. It means honored holder of knowledge. Or teacher. So that is our vocabulary word for the evening. Terenia. I will actually paste that in chat for anybody who's curious. There we go. It didn't work the first time. With that, he began to move. "This is not the northern style your father uses," he said, his voice steady, grounded in memory. "Faster, lower to the ground. You flow like water, through the body, through the blade. You wait for the gap and strike before it closes." Marin's smile was small, but real. This, too, reminded her of something older. Not just her saber style, shaped through years of knife work and unorthodox dueling, but of the form she once glimpsed from afar. Jarius had practiced these forms in the early morning when he thought she slept. Always alone, always with quiet reverence. She followed her grandfather now through the steps, breathing evenly. The saber's blade moved in slow arcs, ghosting through the space between them. Rhenius moved too, mirroring the form. The three of them flowed as one. "Smooth and swift," the old man said. "And sudden." Marin's movement sharpened in response, her foot sliding forward with the turn, saber snapping to centerline before slashing diagonally. She kept the rhythm, her orange blade steady. "The first katas are easy," he continued, raising his practice blade. "Every strike, parry, and counter builds from these." A faint frown crossed her face. She hesitated for the first time since they'd begun. Her stance wavered by a hair as she reached, not with her body, but with the force. Gently, hesitantly, she tried to follow not just his motions, but his intention. The way he felt as he moved, like water, like wind curling through stone. Slowly, she mirrored the shift. Her stance adjusted, her saber swept again, this time smoother, surer. And somewhere in her mind, a whisper. "You are not broken, only unfinished." The kata continued. She watched him, her orange-black blade a whisper through the air, trailing memory and promise with every breath. She didn't speak of Tanagas again, not aloud, but it lingered in every movement she made. The pain, Ethan's fury, Jared's quiet strength. And her father's voice, just once, echoing like wind through the trees. "Marin, I'm proud of you." I'm gonna take a minute there, get some water. Okay. Oh, goodness. The light had shifted by the time they finished, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long shadows over the practice ring. The sounds of sparring quieted as Renius lowered his stance and rolled his shoulders, clearly satisfied with the day's progress. Marin had already returned her saber to her belt, fingers flexing slightly with soreness and strain. A faint sheen of sweat clung to her brow, her braids slightly loosened. I haven't had a day like this in a long time, her grandfather chuckled, wiping his hands. I'll need to catch supper before too long. You two can keep practicing if you'd like, though I imagine you'll both feel it tomorrow. Marin gave a slight, tired grin. Ellen. I mean, yes, by the way. It's a good kind of sore. She glanced at Renius and offered a quiet nod. He stretched, murmuring something about washing up, and wandered toward the stream. She didn't follow right away. Instead, she turned towards the swordmaster's home. Her grandfather was sitting by the door, sharpening a fishing spear with slow, measured care. His weathered features were turned towards the sea, but his posture straightened slightly as she approached. Hungry? He asked, without looking. A little, she admitted. He gestured toward a small stool by the door, and she sat, tucking her legs up beneath her in a way that reminded her of childhood. Quiet evenings beside Jarius after long days of drills or sparring. Her breath caught just for a moment. You did well today, he said after a pause. You moved like someone raised with a blade in her hand. I was, she said softly, her gaze drifting towards the horizon. He taught me young, not just blades, everything. Hand to hand, stealth, survival. He called it being prepared. She hesitated and then added, and later it was Ethan who helped me refine that, who pushed me to temper it. You carry both well, her grandfather said. There was silence for a time, comfortable this time. Then he spoke. You mentioned Tanagas yesterday, when you spoke of his home. The house he built. You called it yours. She nodded. It is now. Ethan and Callista live there. The others come and go. It's where I built my saber. She glanced down at the hilt still clipped to her belt, black and silver with burnt orange accents, and where I finally understood why he built it the way he did. The house. The shrine. You mentioned the shrine, he said, his voice softer now. You said you keep his helmet there? He nodded. It was all we could recover. There was another pause, and then he asked gently. You said it was meant for his daughter. Marin's voice caught, but she nodded again. I found the room years later. He'd kept it sealed. When I finally asked, he told me the truth. About her. About the shuttle. About what Deathwatch took from him. She exhaled shakily. I used to think I had to choose. Jedi or Mandalorian. I thought I had to give one up. But on Tanagas I began to see. He never asked that of me. He gave me both, and I think that's what saved me in the end. Her grandfather studied her and then reached for a small satchel and opened it. From within, he withdrew an old patch, a crest faded with time but still intact. A mythosaur skull intertwined with the wings of the Jedi sigil, the design worn into the leather with patient, practiced hands. The edges were charred, the stitching undone in places, but it was unmistakable. I made this for him, he said quietly. When he left the Marines, I never thought I'd see it again. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing it as if afraid it might vanish under her touch. He kept it? She whispered. I found it again, a few months after he left. Stuffed behind an old trunk, as if he couldn't take it with him but couldn't let it go either. Her fingers curled around the crest gently, almost reverently. You should have it, he said. You wear both legacies already. Might as well carry their symbol. She blinked quickly. Thank you, she whispered, her voice rough. They sat in silence again. The sun was almost fully below the horizon now, casting the water in molten gold. From the stream below, the sound of Renius splashing faintly drifted up towards them. I don't know where the mission will take us, she said after a long moment. Stefan sent for us. Said Renius was needed for something. I was asked to go with him. And Jared? He stayed behind. For now. Watching the Tresinia. He wanted me to walk this path without distraction. Her grandfather's lips twitched. Smart boy. She smiled faintly, her fingers still tracing the stitched lines of the crest. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. No one ever is, he said gently. But you're your father's daughter, and mine. That means something. She turned towards him then, her expression caught somewhere between grief and peace. I'm glad I came here. I am too. He reached over and without a word placed his hand briefly over hers. The crest sat between them, warm from her fingers. In the distance, Renius called out about supper, and the moment quietly dissolved into dusk. Something inside her had settled. The morning came with a soft breeze and low cloud cover. Sunlight filtered through it in pale gold sheets, casting a gentle warmth over the grass and trees just outside the hut. The sounds of the sea still carried faintly on the wind, mingling with birdsong and the rhythmic splash of water against stone. Marin emerged quietly from the hut, having risen earlier than usual. Her steps were slow, measured. Her left knee was wrapped again beneath her trousers, and though she didn't limp as sharply as she had before, strain remained. She found her grandfather already outside. He stood barefoot on a smooth stretch of stone overlooking the shallow stream, his weight evenly distributed, arms lowered but loose as if ready for motion. He turned his head slightly as she approached, a smile forming as he saw her. I was hoping you'd come, he said, before you go. She stepped up beside him, letting the morning air settle into her lungs. You said you might have something to help. Her voice still low with sleep, but it was steady. And I'm going to stop there because we're about to be in an ad. I'll be back. Welcome back, friends. Hope you had an opportunity to get a stretch, grab a drink of water, or grab a snack if you need one. That's what I tend to do with the ad breaks. Enough time to do at least one of those things. Alright. He nodded. No blades this time. He blinked, but followed without question as he moved towards a flat stone near the edge of the stream, shaded by a low tree. He gestured for her to sit and knelt opposite her, opening a small wooden box he'd brought out earlier. Within were a few simple tools, a smooth stone roller, a small tin of herbal balm, and a length of braided cloth. She raised a brow as he set them in place. These were passed to me from a healer back in the mountains, he explained. Simple things. Not Jedi, just tradition and time. She nodded once, carefully rolling up her left pant leg. The knee underneath was still discolored and faintly swollen, though less than before. Her grandfather examined it gently with practiced hands. You're still favoring it, he observed. Colin. She exhaled slowly. It was fractured. And the other knee, shuriken, not deep, but it hit something important. Jared carried me back. I was barely conscious. Ethan was... She paused and then smiled faintly. Not pleased. I wouldn't be either. he said, dipping his fingers into the balm and beginning to massage it lightly into the skin around her knee. His touch was firm but careful. You've been through more than I realized. Marin tilted her head, studying his face. And you didn't ask. You never pressed. He glanced up and gave a gentle shrug. You would have told me when you were ready. That's enough for me. She looked away for a moment, swallowing hard. Thank you. He nodded and then picked up the smooth roller and began pressing it gently into the outer muscles of her thigh and calf. These muscles need strengthening, not just healing. You'll always carry the injury, but that doesn't mean you have to be weak for it. She nodded, quietly absorbing the weight of his words. When Jarius was very young, he continued, he fell from the cliffs above our first camp. He couldn't walk for weeks. He refused to stay down. He was like you. Stubborn. Her lips twitched. I get that from him. He smiled again and then passed her the roller. Your turn. She copied his motions as best she could, wincing occasionally but sticking with it. Over the next hour, he guided her through a sequence of motions. Seated stretches with breathwork, slow standing poses to engage her core and legs, and careful transitions from kneeling to standing using only one leg at a time. There was no rush, no challenge, only the soft murmur of correction and encouragement. I do these every day, he told her. Not for pain, for strength, for control. Marin exhaled slowly, lowering herself into a lunge with care. I can see why. He chuckled. Darius used to skip them, but they were too slow. She laughed. That sounds familiar. When they finished, the sun had climbed higher. The clouds had thinned. Bernice's voice called from the path below. He prepared their bags, and the horses they'd used for part of the journey were ready. Marin stood, brushing her hands together. She then reached for her belt to reclip her saber to its place. Her grandfather noticed the motion and nodded once in approval. That saber suits you. He looked up, meeting his eyes. I didn't know what I was building. Not really. But now, I think, maybe I was remembering him. Nagus, the way Ethan watched me as I built it, like he already knew. He probably did, her grandfather said, then extended his arms, hesitantly at first. Would you? She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. They stayed that way for a long moment, warrior and healer, student and elder, grandfather and granddaughter, each grounding the other in quiet truth. When they pulled apart, Marin gave a small, tired smile. Grandfather, thank you. For all of it. Come back, he said, brushing a lock of hair from her face like Jarius once had. When the path allows. She nodded. I will. And then she turned, limping slightly as she walked back down toward Rhaenys and the waiting horses. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Aboard the Trasunia, 2 days before their return. Jared sat in the co-pilot's seat, a half-eaten ration bar forgotten on the console beside him. The soft hum of the ship was steady. The mountains of Catan were visible through the forward armor plast, with fog clinging low to the ridgelines. The Praxian was quiet today. Training schedules had lightened with Rhaenys and Marin away. Most of the initiates had been sent on field assignments or into deep meditation. But Jared didn't need distractions. He closed his eyes and reached out. Not far, not deep, just enough to brush the presence he knew by heart. Marin. At first, there was only calm, quiet, the kind that came after motion, not before it. Then a flicker, sharp, bright, and strange. He inhaled as the feeling shifted like water flowing into a new shape. Her presence was no longer the tight coil of tension she'd carried after the confrontation in the clearing, nor the subdued rhythm of someone simply pushing through pain. She had changed. Not healed. Not completely, but steadier. There was strength there now, not drawn from anger or guilt, but something rooted, quieter, warmer, full. Jared opened his eyes and exhaled, leaning forward to rest his arms on his knees. He didn't smile, but the weight in his chest eased slightly. She found him, he murmured. Or maybe she remembered something she'd never forgotten. Mounted on. 2 days later. Training was done for the day. Stefan sat in his study, the windows open to the breeze. The scents of pine and earth drifted in alongside the gentle sound of the tea swirling in his cup. The datapad in his hand buzzed with messages, most of them unimportant. He made a note on one or two, adjusted his schedule, and set it aside. And then he paused. He felt them. The steady, quiet light of Rhenius and the subtle shift in Marin's presence, deeper than before, grounded, weighted. She carried something new, and not just the echo of the old injury in her knees. There was something forged, something honed. A small, genuine smile crept across his lips. He set his tea aside and rose just as the door opened. Marin and Rhenius stepped in, dusty, travel-worn, and sun-browned from weeks on the road. Rhenius's eyes looked sharper. Marin carried herself with a subtle shift in posture. She was still limping slightly, but no longer favoring the leg as though hiding a weakness. She now walked with purpose. Safe and useful trip, I trust? Stefan asked as they dropped their packs near the wall. Marin bowed slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting. It was, Serenia. In many ways. Her glance at Rhenius said the rest. He nodded, taking a chair across from Stefan. Eye-opening in more than one sense. We found the swordmaster who developed the style I told you about. Stefan raised a brow and leaned back. Really? I would have thought it was older. I'll have to meet him myself someday. He was from this region, Rhenius continued. Trained in your method, blended in his own work. He recognized our stances almost immediately. Stefan nodded slowly, but his gaze drifted to Marin then. Watching her, she sat with her hands folded. She was quiet, thinking. Something had changed in her, not just physically, not just the limp or the weathered look of a long journey. Something deeper, reforged under pressure. He tilted his head. Are you all right, Marin? She looked up and took a long breath. I am, I think, but I discovered something while we were traveling. Something that I'm still sorting through. Stefan didn't press. Not yet. He'd seen this look before, on Jarius, on Ethan, even on Andrea. Whatever it was, she'd speak when the time was right. Then the rest of the conversation turned to Rhenius' findings. The name Marcaine, the possible Sith lineage. Stefan rose and walked to the window and then to the case of sabers along the wall. He drew one out, a simple hilt marked only with 3 notches along the spine. Marin followed the motion carefully, watching as the memory stirred something in her mentor's gaze. A chapel, Stefan said quietly. He led me to a chapel. He made me break sacred ground to stop him. Marin flinched, and the breath she took came slow and steady, like she was forcing herself not to react further. But Stefan noticed. He noticed everything. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about Jardas Marcaine. It was about legacy, about style, about what they'd learned on the road. Rhenius leaned back and rubbed his hand through his hair, quiet frustration in his tone. Honestly, it almost feels like I'm back where I started. That, Marin looked over, her frown gentle but present. How so? We learned something. You faced what you saw in her. The Swordmaster confirmed it. Doesn't that count for something? He nodded slowly, but there was hesitation. It does, but there's still no clear next step. It's like getting half of a map, just enough to see what might have come before, not enough to see where it leads. Stefan was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea again, his gaze thoughtful. Sometimes legacy works that way, he said, his tone more reflective than instructive. It doesn't always point forward. It anchors you, reminds you where you came from. That's not the same as telling you who you must be. Marin turned her gaze to the window for a moment. He said something similar, she murmured. Rhenius looked over. The old swordmaster? She nodded, and for the first time since they'd entered, her expression softened into something more vulnerable. He told me that Jarius had visited him years ago. He didn't say much about it, just that my father came seeking a way forward after war had taken too much from him. She paused, her voice quiet. He built something different, carved something new from what was left. I think he wanted to leave me something that wasn't just about the blade. Stefan leaned forward, setting his cup aside. He did, he said gently. He left you a choice. That's what matters most. I always thought the saber was the legacy, she admitted. But it wasn't. It was the reason behind it, how it was forged, why he chose the path he did. The saber I built back on Tanagas, it isn't just my weapon. It's everything I've come to understand about who I am. And who you're not, Stefan added. You don't wear your father's life, you carry his memory. Renius nodded slowly. It's the same with her. I don't know what she was raised to believe, but she didn't strike to kill when we fought on Coruscant. She held back. I think maybe she's searching too, caught between what she inherited and what she wants to become. Stefan folded his hands on the desk, watching both of them. That's the heart of legacy. It's not destiny, and it's not a curse. It's weight, and it's yours to carry how you choose. Marin exhaled, her voice almost a whisper. Sometimes it still feels too heavy. Then lean on those who walk beside you, Stefan said gently. That's why we train together. That's why we come home. He looked at Renius and nodded once and then turned back to Stefan. We also learned that the style the swordsman teaches, it blends with everything else we've learned. It adapts. It evolves. It isn't rigid. Like you, Stefan said quietly. Marin smiled faintly. I want to study it more, integrate it with what I've built already. There's a rhythm to it, one I knew even before I understood why. Stefan tilted his head slightly. Because it came from your father? No, she said after a long pause. Because it came from my grandfather. I think it's been there somewhere deep ever since. Stefan didn't move for a long moment. His gaze dropped to the small collection of training hilts near his desk. Unlike the display case that held the sabers of fallen warriors, these were simpler. He'd never stored a hilt of Jarius's because he knew the truth. Jarius Durza had never built a lightsaber. He looked up, his voice low. He never crafted one. Marin blinked. Why? Because he didn't believe that he deserved it, Stefan said softly. After the rampage that followed his wife's death, he made a choice. He said the blade was meant for guardians, not executioners. He feared what he might become if he ever held one again. Marin went still, her breath caught halfway in her throat. That's why he built the shrine, and why he chose to live quietly. He never stopped believing in the Jedi or in you, but he thought his own path ended there. She closed her eyes, her voice barely audible when she spoke again. And that saber I built, it really was the first. Renius sat up straighter, understanding dawning in his eyes. It was a turning point. That's what the old man meant when he showed us those katas. They're not just forms. They're healing. Ways to move forward. Stefan nodded again, this time slower. Your father left no blade, but he carved out a path. It's not a style the Jedi teach. It's older, quieter, and more personal. Marin finally looked up and met Stefan's eyes. I didn't know how much I needed that part of him until I felt it. I always thought I was trying to carry on his fight. But I think maybe I was supposed to finish what he couldn't. That's the weight of legacy, Stefan said, folding his hands atop the desk. Not to carry their war, but to heal what they couldn't, to stand where they fell, and choose not to fall the same way. Renius let out a slow breath. Then maybe that's what Ariana's facing too. She fights like someone who doesn't know which side she belongs to. That's your clue, Stefan said. To find her again. Not to win or defeat her, but to offer her what she hasn't been given. And what's that? Renius asked. A choice, Marin answered before Stefan could. The same one I was given. And the same one my father left behind. Stefan smiled faintly, watching them both with quiet pride. And maybe he did leave a weapon behind after all. It's not the kind anyone can draw. She'd found family again, not in blood, but in truth. She'd spoken to someone who remembered Jarius not as a warrior, or even as a Jedi, but as a boy, a son, She'd felt belonging, a part of her had been restored, and Stefan, watching them both, simply listened. Finally, when Renius leaned back and ran a hand through his hair, Marion leaned forward slightly and said nothing. The steadiness in her presence spoke for her. She wasn't lost. She'd returned to the beginning, one step stronger. Sorry. Making sure I hydrate. Important. The forest clearing. The forest was quiet. The embers of Jared's small campfire crackled softly beneath the canopy of the Katani trees, just outside the Praxium. The stars peeked through where the branches thinned, their soft light washing the ground in a pale silver. He added a few small logs, watching as the fire caught and flared gently to life again. It was peaceful here. Familiar. Behind him, Marin stirred faintly beneath the spare cloak he tucked over her shoulders earlier. She was nestled against the soft rise of their usual spot, a place she'd always returned to since the very first nights they'd trained together. Turned and smiled. Then, quiet as ever, he lay down beside her and brushed his fingertips over her cheek. The gesture was light, almost reverent. The feel of her skin under his fingers grounded him. She opened her eyes at the touch and exhaled, the weight of it in her chest softening. Jared, she murmured, her voice still hazy with sleep. She'd returned only hours before, barely enough time to breathe, but she'd made her way to this place instinctively. He leaned in and kissed her cheek. Looks like you've had one of those trips. Yeah, she whispered, closing her eyes for a beat. Not sure if we found what Renius was looking for, but I learned things I'm not ready to explain yet. You don't have to talk now, he said, his voice low and certain as his fingers continued their slow trail down her neck. You're here. That's enough. She let out another sigh, her head resting back against the bundled jacket beneath her. Just a lot to take in. He pulled her closer, his arms winding gently around her waist, grounding her as he had so many times before. But she didn't let the silence stretch too long. What about you? Master Card said you were out on an assignment? Something low-key? He nodded, her voice soothing. Just re-establishing comms in old sectors, rebuilding intel nets. Not frontline stuff, but it was strange not being here. Any luck? A bit, but keep thinking about this spot, he admitted, his hand finding the small of her back. Wishing I were here, with you. She smiled faintly and then tensed briefly at his touch. A small intake of breath as his fingers found the edges of still healing muscle, but she didn't pull away. Me too. Our mission was frustrating. Oh? He asked, a teasing lift in his brow. Renius wasn't that much of a pain, was he? She laughed quietly, the sound easing some of the heaviness in her chest. Naish, he wasn't the problem. We did find what we were after. At least, he did. But me? Her voice grew quiet. I found something else. Jared brushed his fingers across her cheek again. Something about your father? She nodded. And the man who trained him, who taught him to let go of the war. She looked up at him, her voice nearly breaking. Jared, he never built a lightsaber. That caught him off guard. He searched her expression. He never... But he was a Jedi. Didn't think he deserved one. Not after what he did after her death. Her voice cracked slightly. He trained. He meditated, but he refused to forge a weapon. He said it would be a lie. Jared exhaled slowly, understanding beginning to set in. So when you built yours, I thought I was just doing it for me, but maybe it was more than that. Her fingers brushed over the hilt at her belt, the orange and black saber she'd forged. I think it was for both of us. He nodded softly, pulling her closer until her forehead rested under his chin. That sounds like him. Quiet strength, leaving the choice to you. She trembled slightly against him, but then nuzzled into his neck. We also found someone else. A sword master. A headmaster. He turned out to be Jaren's brother. Jared stiffened slightly. His brother? Black, but not like him. He mourned my father, genuinely. I felt it. She paused, her fingers trailing lightly over the curve of his shoulder. It's strange to hate someone so much and then find out their bloodline carries someone kind. He was silent for a beat, processing it all. Then, with a quiet breath, he kissed the top of her head. You've carried so much. And you've waited. Her voice softened. I don't say it enough, but I see that, Barrett. I don't need you to say it, he whispered, but I'll always listen when you do. She looked up at him then, the firelight catching in her blue eyes. Nikartalir Gar, she whispered, her voice trembling with both truth and fatigue. I cherish you. His voice stilled, barely a breath. I love you, Marin. She smiled as she felt it, not just the words, but the way that he meant them. A bond rooted not just in love, but in understanding. Tonight wasn't about answers. It wasn't even about legacy. It was about being. Just the two of them in the quiet embrace of stars and the flame, and everything unsaid. And for now, that was enough. Oh, perfect. Oh. Stretching a little bit. Don't forget to drink water, kids. I don't drink enough. So, I always have water right there. And if you guys have any questions about any of the words that I'm using, please feel free to ask in chat. Some of them are Mandoa words or phrases. Some are words from Atashir, which is the Katani language that I've been creating. So please feel free to ask in chat and I will try to translate them or explain them as much as I can. We have an ad starting in 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Chapter 24. Catan, the Jedi Praxium, 2 days later. The late morning sun cast soft shadows across the stone pathways that wove between the Praxium's outer walkways. Wind whispered gently through the cypress trees above the meditation courtyard, their rustling branches mingling with the low murmur of voices. Master Stefan Card walked at a measured pace beside the older swordmaster, Mendas, as they circled the outer edge of the central courtyard. Their steps were unhurried, but their expressions were thoughtful. You've done well here, Mendas said, his hands folded behind his back. This place, it breathes purpose, balance. I think your father would be proud, being able to do what he once dreamed of doing himself. Stefan's lips curved in quiet reflection. He wanted to build a sanctuary, he said, pausing to let his eyes drift across the trees. It just took time, and the right people. Mendes chuckled softly. Sometimes that's all it takes. Time and the will to try again. Stefan nodded. You being here, it means a great deal, especially after your time with Renius and Marin. You've helped both of them more than you know. The old man waved the sentiment off, but there was warmth behind the gesture. I felt like I owed it to them. What your son sought and what the girl uncovered. Old shadows should be given light. He glanced up at the Praxium's towering spires above them. What we pass on matters more than what we remember. Down in the courtyard, Marin moved quietly among the perimeter stones, her gait still slightly uneven from her injuries months before. She wore the deep blue tunic of the Praxium again, simple and unadorned. Her braid bounced lightly behind her as she adjusted her vambrace as she moved towards the training circle. She didn't expect to cross their path. Her mind was elsewhere, still trying to make peace with what she'd learned, with Mendes, with Jarius, with the fire she carried. The collision was sudden. Her shoulder bumped into Mendes before she could stop herself, and she half stumbled back, her cheeks flushing a bright crimson. Excuse me, masters, she murmured, recovering her footing quickly. She bowed slightly, attempting to smooth the moment over, though her voice was still tight with embarrassment. Stefan chuckled. Marin, I'm sure you remember our guest? She straightened slowly, her eyes settling on the man beside him. I do, Irenia. Her voice was calm, but her gaze lingered longer than it should have. She gave Mendes a soft nod, not yet speaking the truth aloud. Master Mendes decided to visit us. He brought a few pieces of information he uncovered after your departure. Information? She asked, curiosity breaking through the wariness in her tone. Mendes reached into his satchel and drew out a worn bundle, carefully unwrapping what appeared to be old photographs. Not hollows, actual photographs, faded with age. From the old village. Tournaments, ceremonies. People liked to document things when they could. He passed a few towards Stefan and then handed one to Marin. The moment she saw it, something in her stilled. A younger Mendes stood beside a woman dressed in formal robes, Aaron Marcaine, elegant and poised. But it was the man beside her, standing just behind the others, who caused her breath to catch. Her fingers brushed his image. Dark hair, solemn eyes, that same jawline. The resemblance was undeniable, not to Mendes himself, Darius. Her fingers brushed his image. Sorry. She didn't realize her hand trembled until the photograph shifted. Sorry, she whispered in Katani, blinking away the sting in her eyes. She looked away, struggling to breathe. Stefan, too, had grown still, the photograph pinched tightly between his fingers. This is Aaron? Mendes nodded. It is. Stop right there, because we're about to be in an ad. Go get yourself a drink of water, kids. We'll be right back. And we're back. Give me just a moment here, guys. Alrighty. Oh, Yeah, we were having a really bad lightning storm here earlier, so our power was doing strange things as well. I feel like it wandered down your direction. Ugh, yeah. Stefan exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing. Then that girl that Reneus encountered, he might be her daughter. Marin spoke quietly. He said her name, Ariana. Mendes nodded. She would have been young, but the posture, the blade work, I taught her mother those forms. There was a heavy pause, and Stefan stepped back, his face pale as he stared down at the photograph. Oh, my lady, he breathed. The photo slipped from his hand, fluttering toward the flagstones beneath their boots. Marin moved without thinking, catching his arm before he could stumble against the pillar. Aranya? I've seen her, he said. His voice was distant, years ago, on Renvar. Marin's heart dropped. You're sure? I didn't know her name, but I fought her parents. He looked down, his jaw tight. It was a chapel. They desecrated it, forced the fight there. Mendes lowered his head. You didn't know. No, I didn't. Not then. Stefan turned his eyes skyward. But now? It makes sense. Marin's expression was unreadable. Do you think the girl knows? Stefan nodded. With both her parents being Sith? She knows. Marin swore softly in Mandoa, then caught herself. Apologies. We'll have to see what path she takes, Stefan said. But that choice won't be ours. It'll be hers. One day we may face her again. Marin looked down at the photograph still in her hands, her fingers tracing Mendes's younger face, and the lines that reminded her so much of Jarius, not in blood, but in bearing. Ever since she saw him, she'd known that he reminded her of her father, but now she understood why. The calm, the steel, the weight in his eyes. Mendes was no relation, but he had passed on something Jarius had carried, something that had shaped the man who had chosen her as his own. She held the photograph gently and returned it to Mendes. Thank you, she said, quietly. He gave her a soft nod, his gaze warm. He did well by you. That much is clear. She didn't answer, but the fire behind her gaze said enough. The sun broke gently across the cliffs of Mount Adon, casting soft light through the upper spires of the Praxium. Morning dew clung to the courtyard stones, and the stillness was broken only by the rhythmic echo of a lightsaber practice, kata being performed alone beneath the high arches. Marin's motions were fluid, precise, yet still guarded. She was slower on the turns, compensating for the lingering stiffness in her left knee, but her balance was sure, grounded and purposeful. Stefan stood nearby, his arms folded, watching in silence. He didn't speak until she'd finished the form and lowered her blade. You've come back steadier, he said quietly. The fire's still there, but it doesn't control the breath anymore. Marin turned towards him and offered a quiet smile. I'm trying. He taught me more than just the blade, Aranya. Stefan inclined his head. He would have at his age, and for you, I think he saw echoes of someone he'd once lost. Maybe not by blood, but still family. She lowered her gaze. He's Jarius' father. I'm not his granddaughter by blood, but he still looked at me as if I were. She traced the edge of her vambrace, her voice quiet. And I looked at him and saw Jarius, not just in the face, but in how he carried things, even the grief. Stefan nodded, moving to stand beside her then. Jarius never built a lightsaber. You asked me why once. And now you know. He never forgave himself, she whispered. No, Stefan said, but he tried to be more than what he had been. He found strength again, in choosing you. Marin exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing fractionally. I think I understand that now. They stood in silence for a moment longer before she looked up, brushing her braid back over her shoulder. I should go. Busta says Ethan's been pacing again. Stefan chuckled. He always did fret more than he'd admit. Marin leaned in and embraced him, something rare, something earned. Lore, Serenia, she murmured. Go on then, he said softly, but remember, no matter where you stand, Catan is home. Well, welcome back to Sniper. In August 5, the colony. The colony sat in silence beneath the midday sun, the forest beyond the cliffs swaying gently in the breeze. Life had returned in quiet rhythm. Children laughed from the education center, shopkeepers tended their stalls, and the scent of cooked grains and roasted meat rose faintly from the central square. Aran Werda stepped out of the modest house he now shared with Naul. He squinted up towards the trees as his gloved fingers flexed out of habit, half expecting danger, half aware it wouldn't come today. Still, it took time to unlearn old reflexes. His armor was partial, chestplate, gauntlets, greaves, but the rest of him was dressed in a worn gray coverall. The feel of the earth under his boots was something he was still learning to appreciate. He moved with practiced care as he headed toward the center of the colony, intent on a few errands. That's when he felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a presence he hadn't sensed in weeks. She wasn't hiding, not exactly, but her presence in the forest had softened, smoothed like a stone worn by river currents. Aran turned his head, his eyes narrowing toward the colony's small park. Under the shade of the western trees, on the bench facing away from the center, sat Marin. Her legs were tucked beneath her, hands idle in her lap. She wore a black praxium skirt with a dark blue tunic, formal and oddly quiet, even for her. He approached quietly. Only when he neared did he speak, setting his hands gently on her shoulders. "Sequoia Gar, Marin. Been a while." She startled, only slightly. "Oi, hey," she answered, her voice soft. She shifted, scooting over on the bench to make room. "How are you and Naul doing?" He merely shrugged and leaned against the back of the bench instead of sitting. "We're still adjusting. Not much call for sabotage or recon work in a place like this," he said with dry humor. "But we're well enough. And you?" She hesitated and then looked down at her hands. "I've been sorting through a lot." Her fingers turned over a familiar set of metal tags. Darius's tags, as if grounding herself. After Coruscant, Renius wanted to learn more about the girl he fought. We traveled south. It was supposed to be his mission, but it turned into mine. Aran glanced down at her. "I'm listening." She nodded, and then drew a breath carefully. At one of the schools, Renius challenged their champion. I had to hold off 3 of their students before the master intervened. She paused, her gaze flicking to him for just a moment. "He was Duran's brother." His body went absolutely rigid. "He... what?" "Easy," she said. "He didn't support Danos. Their family disowned him when he was imprisoned, and the master, he told me something else, and gave us a trail to follow." He waited, letting her guide the pace of the conversation. She exhaled slowly. "We found the originator of the sword style Renius saw on Coruscant, but I found something more." Her fingers clenched slightly around the tags. "He is, my Babur, Darius's father." Aran blinked, slowly, and then frowned. "That's a lot." She nodded. "I don't know what I expected, but it definitely wasn't that." She finally looked up at him. He didn't know everything about what Darius became, or that I was adopted, but he saw me, and he still looked at me like family. Bran rested his hand gently over hers. "You were his granddaughter in all the ways that matter." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were a little damp. "He taught me ways to strengthen my knees, his kata, meant for grounding, for healing. I still limp, but I'm not afraid of falling anymore." He studied her then, not just her words, but her posture, her presence. Still injured, still healing, but steadier, rooted. There was a quiet depth to her now, like someone who had walked into her pain and come out whole. "I can feel it," he said. "You're different now." She chuckled dryly, hopefully in a good way. "The right kind of different," he answered. She leaned slightly against his shoulder. "I wasn't sure where else to go when I got back, so I came here." "We're always here," he said. You know that. He nodded and squeezed his hand once. I don't know what comes next, but I know where I stand. There was silence for a moment, save for the wind and the distant laughter of children across the square. Then Aren stood, pushing himself off from the bench, and extended his arm. She took it, rising carefully to her feet. The motion was stiff, but steady and firm. He grinned. You're still a pain sometimes, Jessica. Good, she said. I'd hate to make things too easy. Baton, Card Estate Gardens. The gentle sound of falling water echoed through the Card Estate Gardens, carved into the slope beneath Mount Adon. A spring-fed waterfall flowed steadily into a deep stone-lined pool, ringed with mossy steps and flowering shrubs. Stefan had once favored this place, and now Rhenia sat cross-legged at its edge, his hands resting palm up on his knees. He tried to meditate. But something pressed at the edge of his senses. Faint images, glimpses, whispers that didn't belong to him. Marin had returned to the estate earlier that morning, but had kept mostly to herself. She hadn't said much. There was still too much to process. The journey, the discovery of Mendes, the quiet moments with Stefan before she left Tanagas again. Or Jared, sorry. I don't know what that is. Yeah. Now she trained in silence not far from Rhenius, blades in hand as she practiced the knife kata's Master Mendes had taught her. Her form was slow but elegant, grounded even through the pain in her knees. She hadn't noticed how close she drifted to Rhenius's perch by the pool, maybe 30 meters away from him now. She didn't want to disturb him, but she could feel it now, a low thrum of something unsettled threading through the air. From within his meditation, Rhenius's brow furrowed. The images grew more distinct, two forms circling each other, blurred by memory or distance, but familiar in movement. His heart began to race, not because of fear, but because he recognized them. One of them held a saber of deep, boiling red, the other a silver-blue blade, calm and sure, moving in perfect opposition. Stefan, his father. Rhenius's breath caught. Baton, the old chapel. Ariana Marcaine stood alone in the ruined chapel, her hood pulled back as she traced her fingers along the jagged stone. This place, it felt carved into her soul, though she had never set foot here before. The light through the high stained glass windows was dull, diffused by centuries of dust. She paused before a cracked support column, her hand hovering just above one of the long slashes etched deep into its surface. It wasn't decoration. It was a scar. She touched it, and the force answered. Card Estate Gardens. Marin stilled. Her blades lowered slightly as she caught a flare of confusion from Rhenius's presence. Not volatile, but sharp, visceral. A vision, she realized. Didn't reach deeper, didn't pry. Instead, she let her stance shift, allowing the kata to fade as she knelt on the grass. She grounded herself and waited, letting her presence remain quiet and steady. Rhenius's breath had quickened, the vision sharpened. Now he could see it fully, Stefan calm and centered, stepping around the crumbling pillars of the old chapel. His blade moved in graceful arcs, countering every aggressive strike the red-bladed warrior hurled his way, the men attacking him. Face. Rhenius swallowed hard. Marcaine. The voice echoed in his mind, his father's. You've harmed more than enough, and I will not let it continue. This ends tonight. A moment later, a charge and then a backhanded parry that turned the red blade aside. Stefan pivoted, gripping a saber in a reverse grip, and drove it down into the man's spine with precise finality. Rhenius's eyes snapped open, his breath catching, his heart hammered. The connection still lingered, and it wasn't just memory. She was here. The chapel. Ariana gasped. Her knees hit the stone as the image faded from her mind, replaced with a sickening sense of familiarity. The place she knelt was where he had fallen. Her father. Why? She whispered, her breast shaking as she sat back and tried to steady herself. The cuts in the stone, the way the force still lingered here. Her hands trembled and her heart ached. And then something shifted. He felt him. She's here, Renius said, rising to his feet so fast he nearly stumbled. He turned, scanning the breeze as if the direction might become clear. Marin was already moving. Renius, wait! Are you certain? I saw it, he said, his voice thick with something between awe and dread. Fight. The duel my father never talked about in detail. He told me who he fought, but I never saw it. Until now. Her brow furrowed. You saw her, too? I didn't at first, but now I feel her. I can't explain it, Marin. She's on Catan, and she's close. Marin bit her lip and then stepped closer. They could be watching her, waiting. She's not hiding anymore, Renia said, looking toward the mountains. And neither am I. Catan, the old chapel. Ariana wiped her eyes, the sting of memory sharper than she'd expected. She'd come to Catan because something had pulled at her, insistent, wordless. But she hadn't expected this. Not a vision of her father, not a duel in stone-etched memory, not the pain she hadn't known she still carried, hollow and unfinished. Her hands trembled as she reached again for one of the old cuts in the stone, her fingers hovering just above it. It had been him. This was where he fell. This was where he had died, but it hadn't felt like it did when her mother died. No flames, no shouting, no final breath choked into her arms. This had been clean, resolved. Somehow, just. Why had the Force brought her here? Her breath caught and her senses flared. There was a presence approaching, familiar. She spun sharply, instinct overriding everything else. Her lightsaber ignited in a flash of crimson light, the hum sharp and high in the silence. She took her stance, her blade angled down but ready, just in case. Renius skidded to a stop in the chapel's doorway, throwing an arm back to help Marin behind him. His heart pounded, not from the sprint, but from what he felt. She was here. Just as he had seen. Just as he had known. Marin stumbled to a halt just behind him, catching her balance with a soft curse. She exhaled sharply, her fingers twitching toward the hilt of one of her knives. Don't, Renius said, his eyes still fixed ahead. Hey, Daz, welcome in. She hesitated and then sighed and crouched, keeping to the shadows just inside the stone arch. Her senses swept out across the ridge behind them. Nothing yet, but that didn't mean it would stay that. She watched the confrontation begin. Oh, thank you! Hopefully I'll talk to him later. Thank you for passing that on. Good to see you this evening. Give me just a second. This. Yes. I'm back to reading. Finally. Inside the chapel. Stay back, Ariana warned, her saber humming steadily in her grip. Renius didn't flinch. He walked a few steps forward, his arms open, his saber untouched. You know I won't do that. Marin winced from the doorway. Stubborn, harking Jedi. Ariana hesitated, her shoulders twitched, but her blade didn't rise any higher. Ooh! Oh, you... 78 is a that's not a fail, that's like a C. That's lame. Hopefully... lame. That's lame. Oh, one question? I hate that. I would be too. That's not cool. I didn't come here to fight, Renius said gently, and I'm not surprised you were drawn here. This chapel, It's a place for answers if you're willing to listen. I don't even know what I'm listening for, Ariana murmured. Her eyes shimmered again, her voice cracking. I didn't know what happened to him. I thought my mother said he'd been betrayed. Vernius slowed his pace. He made his choice, and he paid the price for it, but he didn't die a coward. Ariana's hand shook. She lowered the blade slightly. I felt it in the stone. I saw it. He said he'd cut the Jedi into parts. She looked up. And your father said, this ends tonight. Vernius nodded solemnly. I was a child then, but I remember his face when he came back. I didn't understand it at the time. The grief, the burden. He took another step forward. He didn't hate your father. He pitied him. From behind Vernius, Marin finally spoke, her voice low but steady. Fighting doesn't always mean hate. Sometimes it's the only way left. Ariana's eyes flicked to her. And you are? Marin Durza, she said with a slight nod, stepping forward enough to be seen but still keeping to the shadows. She let the name fall without emphasis. It carried its own weight. Ariana hesitated and then slowly shut down her lightsaber. She clipped it to her belt and studied Marin curiously. You act like you expect trouble. Because I do, Marin replied evenly, leaning one shoulder against a pillar. Trouble tends to follow me around. Deathwatch, Sith, worse. We have an ad starting in 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I've had my own share, Ariana said, almost bitterly. She turned away, tracing a hand along one of the stone columns. The Hutts thought they could control me. One got handsy. Her tone turned flippant. He lost a hand. Marin cracked a faint smile. Good. I usually go for knees, but hands make the point. Vernius let out a quiet breath, the tension easing slightly. You're not running anymore. No, Ariana said quietly. I don't think I can. He walked further down the nave of the chapel, pausing in front of the weather-worn, vaguely feminine statue in the alcove. Some called her the Lady of the Valley. No one knew the origin of the name, but it had stood here long before the Jedi rebuilt the chapel. She placed her palm against the statue's base and stood there for a long moment. And then her voice, barely audible. Did he know he'd die here? Vernius walked to her side, stopping just short of touching her arm. I don't know, but I think that he wanted it to mean something. I didn't come here for redemption, Ariana said quietly. I don't even know what I believe anymore. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know. Vernius nodded. Now you do. Behind them, Marin stepped back toward the entrance and resumed her quiet post. Her fingers traced Jarius' tags, and her breath was slow and focused. Vernius glanced over his shoulder at her. Could you give us a moment? Marin's eyes met his, calm and unreadable. She nodded once. Shout if you need backup. He smiled faintly. You'll be the first to know. As Marin stepped back into the shadows beyond the archway, Vernius turned back to Ariana, and together in silence they stood before the place where one legacy had ended and another might finally begin to heal. Marin tried not to listen. Their voices murmured behind her, soft, indistinct, and far enough that she couldn't make out the words, but that only made it worse. The quiet made her too aware of the stillness, of the cold stone beneath her and the echoing hush inside the chapel walls. Her fingers tightened on her thigh, knuckles digging into muscle as she resisted the urge to enhance her hearing with the Force. She could have done it with a thought, but it would have felt wrong. So instead, she focused outward, eyes narrowed, her breath even. The wind brushed past the stained glass behind her, casting rippling shadows across the flagstones. The air outside smelled like frost and wood smoke, faint, distant reminders of winter. And then she saw it. Just a flicker. Motion where there shouldn't be any, a shadow that didn't match the others. Her spine stiffened, every sense sharpened. She raised a hand across the chapel without a word. What? Ariana began, confused, but Renius silenced her with a hand of his own. He was already looking towards Marin. Marin met his gaze and raised one finger. Wait. And then 5. She hesitated. And then another. Her hand swept through a rapid series of gestures once Jarius had taught her, indicating positions, perimeter markers around the chapel. Were you followed? Renius asked, his voice low but tense, already stepping towards the door and drawing his saber with a practiced motion. Ariana's voice faltered. Her shoulders squared, but her eyes flickered towards the floor. No, at least I didn't think... Jenner, of course they didn't trust me. Her jaw clenched, a bitter edge behind her words. Marin exhaled sharply at the sound of the lost in the growing wind pressing against the stained glass. She drew her saber, but didn't ignite it. Not yet. Renius' green blade came to life with a snap hiss. Marin, tactics. Riff it all, she muttered. She scanned the chapel quickly, eyes marking exits, windows, and potential choke points. They'll expect us to stay and fortify, but they've got the high ground. 6 that I can sense, probably more. If we fight our way out, we might make it. But if they're Sith... They are, Ariana said quietly, stepping up beside her. I know some of them. We'll have a hard time. How many can you take? Renius asked, glancing toward the rafters above. 2, Marin answered. 3 if I'm reckless. I'm gonna stop right there, because we're in an ad. I'll be back. Get yourself some water. Welcome back, friends. Guys, I hope that you are having some good study vibes, and I hope that you can pass that second test. No fun. I was never that great at taking tests, so I feel that. Hey, I'm trying to be encouraging. I know. If only I wish it were that easy sometimes. Ah. Oh. Alright. Where did we leave off? Here we go. 2, Marin answered. 3, if I'm reckless. I'm still not back to full strength after... She didn't have to finish that sentence. Reneus only nodded. Oof. That would make your brain hurt, yeah. Sure. Here we go. Ariana frowned. I thought you were combat tested. Not against Sith, Reneus told her. Who was watching... Who was watching Marin with something unreadable in her expression. Against Deathwatch, yes. He looked up again. What if you give me a lift? Marin nodded, raised her hand, and gently lifted Reneus with the force. He caught a beam above them, flipped up, and began cutting a clean hole in the old wooden roof slats. The scent of scorched wood drifted down. Dear lady, Reneus murmured as he worked. Forgive me for drawing a weapon in your sanctuary, but I won't let this place fall a second time. He paused, tested the edge of the opening. It's wide enough. You two can make it. Ariana gestured for Marin to go first. Marin crouched, sprang lightly with the force, and landed beside Reneus atop the beam. Her knees ached from the movement. Cold wind struck her face, sharp and immediate. Snow-laced air poured through the hole in the roof. Her breath curled in front of her lips. Once we're up there, what's the plan? He asked. Reneus looked down and offered his hand to Ariana. Improvising. But we'll have more room to move, maybe even away off this roof. Ariana took the offered hand and bolted through the opening. He landed opposite Marin, steady and silent. And then she stilled. Her eyes widened. You. At the far end of the rooftop, a figure stood. Still as a statue, dark robes rippling in the wind. His lightsaber was unlit, but the threat in his posture was unmistakable. The force around him seethed like a storm barely held in check. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The cold deepened, and Marin's fingers drifted toward her hilt. This was no ambush. This was a reckoning. Oh, Griff, Marin muttered as she saw where Ariana was looking. One of the Sith was already on the roof, likely having anticipated this. Marin shifted slightly and balanced on the balls of her feet. Reneus turned at her words and knew instantly that their advantage was gone. He looked around behind him and saw the others joining them on the roof. Ladies, he whispered, we're surrounded. Ariana's blade was already alive, and she aimed it at the center of the one across from them. The others around them hissed in surprise and tensed at the motion. The one she had seen remained where he was, his eyes still boring into her. Marin's hand clenched into her fist at her side. Reneus. Her voice was quiet and her hands hovered close to her weapons belt, but she didn't draw. Not yet. You dare to hold your blade against me? He said, the words almost like poison as he uttered them. Who helped train you? Took you in when your mother was killed? Sorry. It was she who trained me, Ariana spat. All you did was try to bend me to your will ever since, Jenner. Can I find you with our enemies? Jenner asked her as he started to move forward. The son of one of our deadliest? Do you even know who he really is? Both of your parents have fallen to his blade. That caught Reneus off guard, and he looked toward the Sith. What? Marin hadn't known that either, and for a moment she just stared. Still, she tried to keep focused and turned slightly to see the rest of the group that surrounded them. For the moment, none of the others had drawn weapons. It was the moment of distraction that the others had been waiting for. As one, they rushed in, and Reneus dropped his guard at the words. Ariana, too, hesitated as the statement sank in, but gritted her teeth as she charged forward. Liar! Wait! Reneus tried to call to her, but noticed that the others were closing in. He felt that they were committed, and he immediately took action. Marin, back to me! Marin swore and drew not her saber, but two of her knives. With a flick of her wrist, one went sailing across the ever-shrinking gap and buried itself in the thigh of the one to her right, even as they drew closer to Reneus. Bernice had trouble keeping his balance after jumping to avoid a low strike and heard a cry off to his right. He turned and saw Ariana down, her lightsaber rolling away, and the one she had called Jenner coming towards him. It was enough that he turned to take on the new threat, but it completely threw him off. The third crashed into him from behind with a lunge, and both started rolling down the sloping roof. He tried calling out before they dropped, but the force of the tackle took him entirely by surprise. That left Marin facing her two opponents alone. Her fingers flexed for a moment, and she backed up a step, trying to kick the one in the stomach who now had her blade in his arm. They suddenly backed off, grinning sadistically as one looked past her. They both started to tend to the wound she had inflicted. The low hum of a lightsaber rose behind her. Her eyes widened and Marin turned quickly. Her black-orange blade hissed to life in her hands a second later. She tried to use the force to push the other two away with her free hand before she slashed towards Jenner. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Jenner blocked her strike single-handedly and gripped her by the wrist with his other, grunting as he pulled and started to throw her over his shoulder. Gasping in surprise, Marin instantly went limp, trying to twist out of his grip. She partially succeeded, using her free hand to drive a knife into his shoulder. She then fell hard and felt the breath knocked from her lungs. The slant of the roof caused her to begin rolling towards the edge. Twisting, she slashed towards his legs, but missed. Jenner winced and looked down at her before casually pulling the knife from his shoulder. He looked the blade over and, with her watching, licked the blood off the blade before he drove it into the roof. "You honestly think that small toy would do you any good?" he asked as he held out his hand, and instantly had her up in the air with an invisible hand around her throat. "You've never dealt with us before, have you?" As her eyes went wide, Marin felt her feet leave the roof and an invisible hand around her throat. Dark spots began to dance at the edges of her vision. She shook her head at him and hefted her saber again, using the force to drive it towards his neck. But the lack of air was making it hard to focus. Jenner caught the hilt with his free hand, noting that she hadn't put much force behind it. He pulled it free and looked at her, almost slipping away before dropping her hard to the roof. The blackness crept in on the edges of Marin's vision. She couldn't breathe. Gritting her teeth, she tried to shove him away with the force, but it was no use. The last thing she felt was blinding pain as her head struck the roof, and then she knew nothing more. "Pathetic," Jenner said with a leer as he looked down at the young girl. "Mathos, get our wounded to the ground and summon the shuttle." He looked up at another of his warriors who had taken Renius down the roof, holding his shoulder from the fall. "The boy?" "Knocked out cold," he answered, as he winced in the pain from his shoulder. "Almost wanted to finish him now." "No," Jenner said as he looked at Ariana's body. "Reyes, collect a card. You and Musker take him and Ariana to the shuttle." "What about this one?" Genta asked as he walked up to Marin's still form, looking over her. "I'm sure Kirt Sod would enjoy our having her." "Leave her," Jenner told him as he walked up, calling the knife back into his hand from where he'd driven it into the roof. He contemplated something, and then, grinning, he knew the message he would leave for Stefan Card. He knelt beside Marin, making sure he used enough force to do the work. He set about carving two symbols into the right chestplate of her armor. He stood and gestured to the others after it was done. "Away, we must be off." Aboard the Sith shuttle. The interior of the shuttle was dim, cold, and industrial. No markings, no insignia. Ariana stirred first, groaning as she pushed herself up from the deck. Her saber was gone. Her wrists were bound. She turned her head sharply. Renius lay crumpled nearby, still unconscious. His breathing was shallow but steady. A thin line of blood traced down from his hairline where he must have hit the side of the shuttle. "Renius," she whispered, nudging him with her shoulder as much as she could. "Come on." He didn't stir. She pressed her head against the metal wall and closed her eyes. She didn't need the force to feel it. They were moving. Fast. Stars blurred outside the viewport, the streaks of hyperspace swallowing the sky. Across the cabin, one of the Sith guards, Reyes, watched her with mild curiosity but didn't speak. Ariana met his gaze with all the venom she could muster, but it earned only a quiet smirk. "You're awake," he said flatly. He won't be for a while. Ariana swallowed hard, not looking at Renius again for fear her expression would give her away. Dinner wasn't aboard. It could be good. Or worse. Where are we going? She asked quietly. Reyes didn't answer, but in her heart she already knew. It wouldn't be anywhere good. The chapel roof. Baton. The sky had darkened by the time they arrived, and a chill wind stirred the treetops surrounding the old sanctuary. Jared was the first to reach her, crumpled near the western edge of the roof, half hidden behind a collapsed beam. Her armor was battered, and one of her van braces had cracked. Saber was gone. And carved into her right chest plate, etched deep into the Beskar, were two symbols. One, an ancient rune for betrayal, the other a Sith mark of ownership. Stefan knelt beside her without a word, his fingers brushing the symbols. The marks told a story, a warning, a message meant for him. He wouldn't have done this, Jared said quietly behind him. I know, Stefan nodded. Help me. Together they eased her over to her back. Stefan placed a hand on her forehead, closed his eyes, and called gently on the Force. Marin, he murmured. Marin, can you hear me? At first, there was only stillness. Then, movement. Her fingers twitched. Her brow furrowed, and she hissed sharply in pain. Daryame, she muttered in Mandoa, her voice hoarse. Her body tensed, and her hand reached instinctively for a blade that wasn't there. Easy, Stefan said, holding a canteen to her lips. You're safe. Try not to move too fast. Marin drank, her eyes fluttering open. Everything hurt. Her vision swam, but she knew that voice. She blinked up at him and winced. Why? Where? You're on the roof of the chapel. We only just found you. He nodded weakly, frowning as she tried to remember. Too many of them, she whispered. We tried to hold the roof. Ariana, Renius. He was with me, her voice caught. Where is he? Stefan glanced toward Jared and then back down at her. He was here? She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the flare of pain in her ribs and neck. They were after her. Sith. We didn't expect 6 of them. I didn't sense them all until it was too late. She paused, breathing shallowly. Jenner was with them. He took Renius and Ariana. They're not here. He left me. Stefan's expression tightened at the name. Jared stepped forward, crouching beside her. Marin, where's your lightsaber? That question made her freeze. Her hand reached to her side. There was nothing. She closed her eyes and stretched out with the Force. Nothing. It's not here, she whispered, her voice cracking. He took it. I tried to stop him. I couldn't breathe. I blacked out. She trembled, her hand gripping Jared's tightly. Why would he take it? Jared asked, looking toward Stefan. The elder Jedi's eyes narrowed. As a trophy, or as a tool. Either way, it means he has something planned. Marin struggled to her knees, wincing as the motion pulled at injuries that were still healing. Teeth gritted against dizziness. The Death Watch were working with the Sith, she said. If they give it to Bevan... Her voice cracked. Stefan looked at Jared. Help her up. Carefully. Dylan, send word to your mother. Tell her everything. Jared slid an arm beneath Marin's shoulders, gently helping her to her feet. She leaned heavily against his shoulder, her eyes half closed. I'm sorry, Dorenu, she whispered. Stefan shook his head. You held your ground against Sith. There was no shame in surviving. I didn't draw my saber until it was too late. Her voice was muffled now, pressed against Jared's shoulder. They took him. He looked down at her and offered a faint smile. Then we'll get him back. He nodded once, but the guilt remained, gnawing deep in her chest. As Jared helped her down from the roof, she murmured, How did you find me? Master Card felt it, he told her. In meditation, there was a jolt in the Force. It took time to track it. Marin squinted up at the fading light. It's been most of a day. She sighed, her fingers searching instinctively for the familiar weight of her father's tags. They were still there. She exhaled slowly, a flicker of resolve returning. I'll come back, Jared said firmly. I'll search the grounds. Saber might still be out there. She nodded faintly. I hope so. But even as she said it, she feared it wouldn't be enough. This wasn't over. Sorry. Slouching. Slouching. Korriban. Ariana awoke to darkness. Cold, heavy, and dry, the air bit into her lungs with each breath. She was lying on stone, rough, uneven, the kind that belonged to ancient places and worse memories. Her wrists were bound again, this time with magnetic cuffs, and there was something tight around her neck. An inhibitor, likely dampening her connection to the Force. She coughed once, her head aching. Renius? There was no answer. She pushed herself up slowly and saw him lying a few feet away, unmoving. Heart clenched. Renius! She crawled towards him on her elbows, wincing as her muscles screamed in protest. Renius, please! His eyes fluttered, a groan escaped his lips, low and hoarse. And then he tensed, rolling to his side with a quiet curse. Where? We're on Korriban, Ariana whispered. I can feel it. The stone. The air. It's old. Sith. He blinked blearily. My saber? Gone. She nodded towards his belt. Mine too. Renius sat up slowly. He was bruised, scraped, and bleeding from a split lip and temple, but alive. They left us alive. For now, she said grimly. I think Jenner wanted to prove a point. Silence fell. Even without the Force, Korriban pulsed around them like a wound that refused to close. Shadow passed the far end of the hall, then another. Watching. Waiting. They were not alone. The Praxium. Catan. Jared pulled the speeder to a gentle stop inside the lower courtyard, the soft hum of its repulsor lift engines fading into stillness. The stone walls of the Praxium glowed amber in the late afternoon sun, and a cool breeze stirred the banners on the outer wall. He shut the engines down, glanced over his shoulder, and leaned up towards the bundled figure in the back. Marin, we're here. She stirred faintly under the blanket, her breath slow and shallow. After a long moment, her eyes cracked open. Rita, she murmured hoarsely. I've got you, he said softly, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers cold but steady. He guided her gently to her feet. It stirred something in her chest, a memory of the clearing. She swayed once. He caught her. They passed through the main doors, students glancing over but saying nothing. Some paused, some drawn by the sight of battered armor and blood-stained cloth. Marin kept her eyes on the stone path ahead, breathing through the dizziness. Her wrist throbbed, and her ribs and knees ached with every step. She didn't know why the injuries weren't worse, why she hadn't died. Because they wanted me alive, she realized. They wanted me to deliver something. Jared guided her into one of the unoccupied quarters in the old dorms. It was plain but quiet, and the moment the door shut behind them, silence was soothing. He helped her sit down on the bunk and then carefully began removing her armor plates. She watched, with her eyes half-lidded as he placed each piece down with deliberate care. You're particular about your kit, he said, trying to keep his tone light. Didn't want to guess wrong. Thanks, she whispered. I hate when someone tosses it like scrap. She reached for her chest plate and then winced. He took it instead, settling it beside her and turning it over. His fingers traced the markings carved deep into the Beskar. Marin, he said quietly, these weren't meant for you alone. She frowned, turning her head carefully towards him. What do you mean? They left you here, alive, marked. He turned the plate so she could see the runes. This is a message. Her breath caught. They're Sith runes, she whispered, reaching out to touch the carvings. Not Mandoa. I've never seen these before. Master Karad has, Jared replied. He said they were old, older than anything recent. Symbols of possession and betrayal. She looked away. Why me? Jared didn't answer right away. Maybe because of who you are, or maybe because they wanted Card to find you. They knew exactly what they were doing. They could have taken me, she said bitterly. Could have handed me off to Kurtzad or Bevan. Her stomach twisted at the mere thought. But they didn't. She went still at that. The implication unnerved her. Bevan would have made me suffer, she said finally. Jenner knew that, so he left me, bruised, broken, but intact. Enough to speak. Jared pulled her close. Because we'll answer. She nodded against his chest, her voice a low rasp. We have to find them. Rhenius, the girl. I should have done more. You faced Sith, Marin, he said gently. Not Deathwatch. Never fought someone like that before. I should have drawn my saber earlier. You did what you could. That's enough. She closed her eyes as his fingers traced lightly along her jaw. I still feel like I failed. You didn't. She shuddered and exhaled. Arenya will want to go after them. He will. And we'll go with him. I don't have my saber. You'll build another, he said. And this time, maybe we'll go together. No secrets. Her fingers brushed her father's tags and she stilled under his fingers. No secrets. No lies. Just the truth and whatever it would cost. That is the end of chapter 24. We are about to have an ad in, well, 4 minutes and 44 seconds. So I'm gonna start the chapter 25. Alright. Chapter 25. The Praxium, guest quarters. Yes. Yeah, we can vibe. It's all good. I'm gonna keep reading until the ad cuts us off. Yeah, I bet they do. You've got it though, I know you do. You can do this. The Praxium, guest quarters. There was a knock at the door, barely a tap, but both Marin and Jared already knew who it was. The presence was familiar. There was a familiar weight in the force. Jared opened it with a simple gesture, his hand not even lifting an inch. Ethan Bevan stepped inside, his helmet under one arm, the other flexing slightly as if working out some stiffness in his shoulder. His boots were damp from the spring mud clinging to the roads outside the village. He crossed the room in 3 purposeful strides, sharp eyes sweeping over her like a field assessment. I was resupplying in the village when Card called, he said gruffly, stopping just short of the bunk. You still reeling from it? Marin didn't answer right away. She was seated against the pillows, still in the padded underlayer of her armor. Jared had removed the plates and laid them aside, but the shape of the fight still clung to her, bruises blooming purple beneath her collarbone, fingers stiff from strain, and blood dried just behind her left ear where she'd hit the roof. Her fingertips were absently tracing the glyphs etched into her chest plate, an anchor, or maybe just a wound she couldn't stop touching. Lek, she murmured. Her voice was low, raw, the word barely surfacing above her breath. Ethan shifted slightly, catching her hesitation, and then turned to a nearby chair, turning it backwards and straddling it, folding his arms across the top. He tilted his head slightly. Care to talk? It usually helps you. AC theory? That sounds way beyond my brain power at the moment. I'm just over here reading in my corner, okay? Hopefully the chill vibes are helping. At least I hope they are. That's why we're here. Well, I'm glad. That's what they're for. Okay. That would probably make my brain hurt, so I feel that. I do. Ugh. Why are they cramming so much into so little time? That just makes your brain want to explode. All good. It is all good. And they're cramming a semester's worth into like 2 weeks. Yikes. That's a little scary. Alright. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away. I've only ever fought Kirzad. This was different. I hesitated. Tried to disable 2 of them without using my saber. I didn't draw until Jenner moved. By then, it was already too late. You followed the codes you were raised with, Ethan said evenly. You showed restraint. They didn't. No, he agreed, his voice gravelly and low. Teeth rarely do. You were lucky. They didn't come to kill. She clenched her jaw. No, they came for a message. She placed the chest plate aside with more force than necessary. The motion made her ribs ache, her wrists twinge. He batted my saber aside like I was still a child. Couldn't even hold my ground. That's because they're trained in darkness, Jared said quietly from where he sat beside her. You haven't. Sith twist the Force. Everything they are is sharpened by pain, rage, and fear. Marin frowned. But Rinius, hasn't he faced Sith before? He was at Mist, Jared said, letting the name speak for itself. I think we're about to have an ad, so I'm gonna chill out for a second. That sounds like a lot. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. Did I just read through the ad? Or was it just me? I feel like maybe I did. Oh, there's the ad. Be right back. Yeah, definitely check on that, because, I think you may be right if you're doing, like, electrical engineering courses. Definitely feel like you'd be at least to an associate's. For sure. So definitely check on that. Alright. Marin frowned. But Rinius, hasn't he faced Sith before? He was at Mist, Jared said, letting the name speak for itself. She looked down, her voice dropped to a whisper. Maybe I was too quick to request knighting. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. Don't even think that. His voice was sharp, cutting across the air between them as he rose partially out of the chair. You wouldn't have passed those trials if you weren't ready. Kara doesn't sign off lightly, and you know that. Marin swallowed, rubbing the back of her neck where the skin was still tender and crusted with dried blood. Her thumb found the chain of Jairus' tags and held it like a grounding tether. Silent, stretched, and then Ethan's gaze flicked to the armor laid out across the nearby table. His brows furrowed. Marin, he said slowly, your saber. She didn't answer. He stood, his eyes narrowing slightly. Marin. She turned away. I know. They took it. Why? I don't know, she whispered. Maybe to hand off to Bevan. Maybe as a trophy. Maybe to remind me I lost. Jared's hands clenched. Ethan paced the narrow space in front of the bunk. Bevan wouldn't need it. Not unless he was trying to send a message, and we've heard nothing from him since Coruscant. She nodded slowly. I don't think this was about him, then. Maybe it was for the glyphs. For Sensei. If they were working with Kurt Saad, Jared murmured, then it's all part of the same message. Marin exhaled shakily, and it was only then that she noticed that her hands were trembling. I'll need to build another, she said softly. I think my father left enough parts. Maybe the mine on Tanagas has a suitable crystal. Ethan crouched beside the bed, his expression softer now. You're not flying to Tanagas anytime soon. You can barely sit up. And we still don't know the full extent of your concussion. She winced, but didn't argue. I'm sorry. Her head throbbed steadily, the kind of pain that pushed at the edges of awareness without quite breaching it. I mean, that's fair. Then what can I do? She asked, not quite looking at either of them. I can't just sit here. Not while they have Rinius. Rest, Jared said firmly. We'll act as soon as we're ready. Not before. Marin's eyes drifted shut. For a moment, she seemed to yield to the exhaustion in her bones. Maybe our intel can help, she murmured. If they were on Coruscant or Bastion, maybe there's still a trail. We'll check later, Ethan said as he stood. For now, you recover. Jared, don't let her slip out. I won't, Jared promised, resting a hand on her shoulder. Marin sighed. I'm not used to losing, said. You didn't lose, Jared murmured. You survived. She looked at him. I went for my knives first. Only tried to wound. You followed what we were taught, he replied. Last resort if cooler heads don't prevail. She nodded faintly and then leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his shoulder. Didn't even flinch when I struck, just swatted it aside. Then next time, Ethan said from the doorway, you'll strike harder. She gave a faint, bitter laugh and didn't reply. Ethan lingered for a moment more before stepping out. I'll return later. As the door shut with a soft click, Marin gripped Jared's hand. Don't go far, she whispered. Still a bit jumpy. I'll stay in the monastery. Promise. He kissed her temple and settled beside her again, watching her breathing even out as sleep at last began to claim her. Sometime later, the light filtered softly through the high windows of the guest quarters, casting pale golden rays against the stone walls. Dust motes drifted lazily in the stillness. Marin stirred beneath a thin blanket, groaning softly as she turned over. Her limbs felt heavy, but not as leaden as they had before. Still sore, still stiff, but the pain had ebbed from a roar to a pulse. She managed to sit up with a hiss of breath, bracing her hands on the edge of the bunk. Her head spun as if the world was still catching up to her, and she remained still until it settled. Her fingers brushed over the side table. Someone had left a clean set of tunics folded beside her armor. Her boots had been cleaned and set just under the bench. Carefully, Marin dressed. Every movement reminded her of the battle, the sharp pull in her right knee, the lingering ache in her ribs, throb in her wrist. Ghost from the clearing, from the chapel rooftop. Her braid fell loose over one shoulder as she sat to tug on her boots. She paused halfway through, hearing something faint, melodic and mournful. Flute. For a moment, her breath caught that sound. She hadn't heard it in a long time. Her hands stilled over the leather laces as recognition settled in. It was Andrea. Rising slowly, Marin followed the melody. Through the courtyard, past the budding cypress, down the gravel path shaded by thick groves of pine and clouded ferns. Garrett joined her without needing to be asked, silent and steady at her side. The sound led them toward the mountain grotto. It drifted like mist through the trees, full of yearning. There was sorrow in every note, but not just grief. There was clarity, too. Andrea's song was never just music, it was expression, memory, discipline in the force woven through sound. Marin paused at the entrance to the grotto, bracing her hand on the stone wall. Andrea sat on the central rock, flute to her lips, her eyes closed in meditation. The breeze stirred her robes as the music floated outward, curling through the air like smoke from an extinguished flame. Around her, subtle currents of the force shimmered. They weren't strong. They were precise, balanced, anchored in the grief she refused to let define her. Marin watched in silence, her chest tight. She couldn't shake the guilt, not truly, not yet. It clung to her like the ache in her wrist. You can't focus on could have or should have, Marin, Andrea said softly, never opening her eyes. The flute rested now in her lap. You'll soon lose sight of everything else. I know, Marin whispered, but it's hard not to. I keep wondering what they're going through. Rhenius, the girl, Ariana. I should have done more. Andrea set the flute aside gently and turned towards her. We all wish we could have done more, she said. Even my father does, and you know how much that eats at him. I don't want to just sit here while others go, Marin said, stepping closer. I want to help. I need to help. Jared remained silent, but his presence at her shoulder offered quiet support. Andrea gave her a small smile. Then prepare, because I think you're going along. Marin blinked. Wait, what? Andrea chuckled at her expression, a brief glimmer of her usual sharp wit resurfacing. An old memory. You reminded me of myself. Determined, tired, too stubborn to stay put. But is that wise? Marin asked, her tone quieter now. I barely held my ground. It was my first real confrontation with Sith. Froze. I tried to follow what I had been taught. Don't escalate. I used knives first, but it didn't even matter. Andrea stood and stepped down from where she'd been sitting, her expression somber. There's no training that fully prepares you for facing them. I faced Sith once. It was enough. They don't hold back. They don't offer mercy. Their strength is deception, brutality, and breaking every code we live by. Marin looked down. He didn't try to kill me. Not at first. It felt like he wanted me to carry a message. You did, Andrea said, walking over to the edge of the stone pool and crouching. According to my father, symbols on your chestplate were Sith glyphs. Coordinates. The Korriban. Korriban, Marin echoed, her expression tightening. He faintly heard Newell's words from months ago. That's where they took Rhenius and Ariana, but why there? Andrea nodded slowly. The one Sith have begun to resurface. You've heard whispers of it. Korriban was always their stronghold, some say their birthplace. They're bringing prisoners there, for indoctrination, or worse. Marin stood still for a long moment, the implication settling in her chest. Then we have to go. How can I prepare? Andrea turned towards her again. You'll have time. Father's still arranging the plan, and he wants you ready in the morning. Combat gear packed. Marin arched an eyebrow. Escargam too? Andrea gave a slow nod. He said, combat gear. At your discretion. Marin hesitated. It's not just gear. It's identity, and I'm still learning what that means. I know, Andrea said gently. but maybe now is the time to stop choosing between your legacies and carry both. At that, Marin finally looked toward Jared, who met her gaze and gave a soft, quiet nod. Then, with more steadiness than she thought she could muster, Marin reached into her belt pouch and withdrew Jerry's tags. She pressed them into her palm. Her thumb ran once across the edge. "No more hesitation," she said softly. Andrea looked at her for a moment, really looked, and then smiled. "Good." August 5. The colony. Twilight blanketed the colony in muted gold, the shadows lengthening across the forest clearing and casting long fingers between the prefabs and the rooftops. Aran stretched his arms as he finished sealing glass patch on the roof, the hiss of sealant fading into the quiet rustle of wind in the high pines. Things had been quiet for a time, but he learned never to mistake quiet for safety. Then he felt her, a signature in the edges of his awareness, worn, familiar, and unguarded. Marin, his brow furrowed. He shouldn't have been here. He stepped lightly down from the roof and ducked into the doorway where Noel stood drying her hands at the sink. One look was all she needed. "She's here." He nodded. Slipped out of the Praxium. Alone. Noel rolled her eyes but said nothing. She tilted her head, silently giving him leave. Aran kissed her cheek in thanks and stepped back out into the dusk. Marin was wandering the narrow stone paths of the colony, moving more from memory than intention. The dull ache in her wrist had become a throb, and her limp was more pronounced than it had been earlier. She hadn't slept since the previous night. Her neck burned at the base where the impact had struck, and the concussion fog still lingered behind her eyes. But she couldn't sit still. She needed to breathe, to get away from the stifling calm of the Praxium. The whispered reassurances, the waiting, the way Jared had hovered even when he said he wouldn't. She leaned a hand against the low wall and exhaled slowly. "I figured I'd find you here." The voice wasn't harsh, just steady, knowing. She turned toward it, and her heart dropped a little. Jared. He stepped out from beneath the overhang of the nearby building, his arms folded across his chest. His hood was down, his hair still damp from the mountain mist. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was concern. "I waited 10 minutes after I felt you slip out," he said. "Then I followed your trail. You're not exactly subtle when you're hurting." "Didn't want to wake you," she muttered. "You didn't," he replied quietly. "You worried me." Before she could answer, another presence approached. It ran, jogging lightly up the path. He slowed when he spotted Jared and gave a small, sardonic smile. "Seems I wasn't the only one keeping track of her." Jared gave him a tight nod and then turned back to Marin. "You didn't have to come here alone. Not like this." "I needed to," she said, sharper than she meant to. "I couldn't sit there, waiting to be told what comes next. I needed to do something." Jared didn't argue. He just stepped forward and gently took her hand, the one that wasn't swollen, and guided her to a bench. Aran followed and stood beside them, his arms folded, posture protected without being overbearing. "You still got blurred vision and a limp," Aran noted quietly. "You even tried to climb stairs to get down here?" Marin glared at him faintly. Roof access was clear. "Done worse." "That's the problem," Jared muttered under his breath, crouching beside her. "You always do worse." "I faced 2 Sith, Jared," she said, her voice low. "And I froze. I hesitated. I lost my saber. They marked me. So no, I couldn't just sit there waiting to be told I was ready again. I had to move." Aran gave her a look then, less scolding, more knowing. 6 of them, right? You, Renius, and the girl? She nodded, 3 standing at the end of it. "But not here." "Then you lived. You're standing. You're still here," Jared said, his hand still holding hers firmly. She swallowed hard and looked away. "I'm going with you," Aran said. "To Korriban, if you'll have me. I've already told Noel." Marin blinked at him. "You're sure? The colonist... She can handle the drills for a week or 2. You'll need someone who knows how to fight seat tactics and who doesn't wear a jetty robe. He smirked faintly at her expression. Besides, they might not expect someone like me. Erin nodded, her voice quiet. Could use you. Then it's settled, Loren said simply. I'll be ready by nightfall. Jared stood again and gave her a long, quiet look. You should come back with me. Rest a few hours before dawn. She hesitated and then nodded. All right. She rose to her feet, slightly wobbly, and Jared gently steadied her with an arm around her waist. As they turned to go, Loren touched her shoulder briefly and offered a parting nod. Returshi me, called. Marin smiled faintly. Returshi me, Aran. It means, when we meet again, or something like that. Sorry. I have all this stuff in my head. I forget sometimes. And with that, she leaned more heavily into Jared's side than she would ever admit, letting herself be led back into the shadows of the path, toward the shuttle that would take them back to the estate, toward morning, toward Korriban. On August 5, northern landing field, pre-dawn. The sky was still dark, that soft velvet gray that comes just before sunrise. Mist clung to the tree line surrounding the northern ridge, and the landing lights of the shuttle glowed faintly against the dewy clearing. Inside, pre-flight checks hummed quietly and supplies had been stowed. Marin was still resting, per Stefan's order. Jared stood just outside the end of the ramp, his arms crossed, cloak drawn tight against the mountain chill. Footsteps approached, steady, familiar. He didn't turn. I figured he'd be early. Aran stepped up beside him, a rucksack over one shoulder, his new gear, dulled and practical. I didn't sleep. Figured you didn't either. Jared gave a low grunt of acknowledgement. They stood in silence for a few beats before Aran spoke again. Noel's holding down the drills. We're to meet at Kingston Port. Jared nodded. We'll rendezvous with Mr. Card there. He's made arrangements. Right. The quiet lingered, and then Aran glanced sideways. She told me some of the story, back when we first met, about her father. Jared's posture shifted slightly. She said he wasn't Kerzad, that Duran murdered his wife and their unborn child when he refused to join. Jared's jaw tightened. That's true. I didn't believe it at first, Aran said quietly. I didn't want to. It was easier to think he'd turned on them. She came from something twisted. She didn't, Jared said, his voice flat but not angry. Darius Durza didn't follow Duran. He refused, and he paid the price for it. Aran looked ahead at the ridge beyond. Duran's name was still spoken with reverence when I was a cadet. His rhetoric shaped many of us. I thought it was strength, but the more Marin talked, the more it unraveled. He didn't stand for strength, just control. That's what they always call it, Jared said, looking at the mist beyond the landing pad. Strength, unity, loyalty, but it's all about domination. It always was. Another silence, and then Aran asked, how old was she when Jarius found her? Jared hesitated. 5, maybe 6. She'd stowed away on the Tresinia, trying to rob him with a broken knife. Aran huffed a breath of half laughter. Figures. He gave her a choice, Jared said, softer now. Didn't raise her to be like him, just gave her room to become herself. That's rare, Aran murmured. For a Mandalorian. For anyone. She carries that, Jared said, even if she doesn't always know it. There was a long pause. Then Aran broke the silence, his voice quieter than before. I used to think redemption came with punishment, that you had to bleed for your past to be free of it. Jared turned towards him slightly. And now? Aran's gaze stayed fixed on the ridge beyond. Now I think it might come from choosing to stand with the right people, even if you're not sure they'll ever fully trust you. Jared studied him for a moment and then nodded once. She trusts you more than you know. I don't deserve that. None of us do, Jared replied. Not always. It doesn't mean it's not real. The rumble of the shuttle's systems deepened. Pre-flight checks nearing completion. Jared exhaled slowly. We leave in 30. You ready? Ren shifted the pack on his shoulder. Yeah. They turned toward the ramp in tandem, two men shaped by different paths but now carrying the same vow. To stand with her, see this through, to bring them home. The Durza estate workshop before dawn. The room was still shadowed in pale starlight when Marin woke. Her body protested as she sat up, her neck stiff, wrist sore, and the old ache flared through her still-healing knees. She bit down on the pain and eased herself upright, pressing one hand against the edge of the small workbench for balance. Her blankets remained untouched after last night's work. Laid across the bench in quiet reverence were the pieces of her new weapon. No flourishes, no etched sigils, no memory crystal, no hidden message, just plain components pulled from Jarius's workshop drawers, bare alloy and tempered internal coils, stored away long ago for a project he never dared attempt. He'd never built a saber, not after the blood he spilled. Marin ran her fingers along the parts, then took a deep breath and set to work. Her mind stilled, not with ceremony, but focus. The orange crystal she'd chosen pulsed softly in the center of the ring clamps. Survivor's blade, something forged to endure. Her hands moved with quiet certainty. The hilt was matte gray with minimal banding, grip focused, not elegant. A capped emitter with only the faintest groove where the blade would activate. Didn't want it to gleam. Didn't want it to say anything at all. This wasn't about being seen. This was about getting Rinius and the girl back. The blade snapped to life with a sharp fish crack. Orange light bathed the room, steady and bold. It hummed not with defiance, but duty. She nodded once and shut it off. She moved quietly after that, dressing in her spare armor, plain and unmarked. Green-gray plates, no crest, no Jedi sigil, no mythosaur. She strapped her vambraces down tight and covered the gauntlets with a wrap. The saber was clipped to the back of her belt, half concealed beneath the traveling cloak that she threw over her shoulders. Her DE-10s were holstered at her thigh. Her knife was in her boot, and several throwing knives and shuriken were tucked into sheaths at her belt. By the time she stepped outside, the estate was still quiet. Callista had lit a single lantern by the door. They said nothing as Marin passed, just a nod. Callista's eyes lingered on her briefly. There was approval there, but also a mother's worry. Marin paused just before the edge of the landing. She turned her head slightly. I'll bring them back. Callista's voice was soft. Just come home. The air was cold up at the northern landing field, sharper than in the forest below. Morning fog drifted across the clearing, and the shuttle waited, silent, prepped. Ran stood beside it already, his own armor just as muted. No clan sigil, no rank, just practical gear and a faint stiffness to his stance, like he hadn't slept. He'd already stowed his gear. He towed an antigrav locker via the wrist tether. He looked up first. You're limping. Marin smiled faintly. You're observant. Jared emerged from the shuttle's ramp as she approached. His eyes went to her saber, then the armor, then her expression. You sure about this? He asked. Marin met his gaze. No, but I'm going anyway. He reached for her hand briefly, grounding her. Then we're with you. She nodded once, and then stepped past them both, moving towards the ramp. Let's bring them home, she said. And the fog swallowed their trail as the shuttle rose into the sky, heading for Catan. Catan, Kingston Spaceport, early morning. The sky was still streaked with the gray-blue haze of dawn as the shuttle descended onto the spaceport's east pad. Marin stood in the main compartment, one hand gripping the strut beside her as the ship touched down. She wore her green coverall, scuffed but clean, and had bound her hair in a practical braid. No crest, no armor. Her antigrav locker rested beside her boots, its steel lights blinking softly. The green armor within was unmarked and quiet. Jared descended first, already dressed in similarly utilitarian clothing. Aran followed, his expression neutral beneath the hood pulled low over his brow. He looked quieter than usual, still watchful. The last few days had settled him the same way they had on her. He too towed an antigrav locker with his armor. Marin exhaled softly and keyed the locker's tether on her left wrist, letting it hover behind her as she stepped onto the landing ramp. The morning air was cooler here than on Tanagas, thinner too, and touched with the salt of the distant sea. They crossed toward the auxiliary loading gate, where a familiar old hover truck idled beside the terminal building. Stefan Card leaned against the hood, datapad in hand. His eyes flicked up as the three of them approached, and he smiled faintly. There was pride behind it, though. His usual sharpness remained. "Took your time," he said, motioning them toward the back of the truck. "I've already cleared us for access. Get in. We're parked near the old freight rows. Our ride's waiting." No further explanation was needed. Marin climbed into the truck bed, adjusting the tether so that her locker could rest beside her. Jared stepped in after, settling beside her shoulder without a word as he set down his pack. Bran slid in across from them, arms crossed loosely after settling his own locker. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. The city of Kingston slid past as they drove. It was quieter this time, quieter even than she remembered. But then again, maybe it was just her. She glanced down at her wrist where the tether line connected, then at the small silver lightsaber hilt tucked into her belt. Orange-bladed, simple, functional. The crystal thrummed quietly even now, as if sensing her unrest. I'm gonna pause there, because we're about to be in an ad. Go get some water. Have a stretch. Get a snack. I'm gonna do that. I will see you guys in a minute and a half. And we're back. Welcome back, friends. Hope you had a chance to get up and stretch your legs. Ready to jump back into reading. We are getting into the latter portion of the chapter, so should be able to finish it by 10, actually. Right. She glanced down at her wrist where the tether line connected, and then at the small lightsaber hilt clipped to her belt. Orange-bladed, simple, functional. The crystal thrummed quietly even now, as if sensing her unrest. She had made it for one purpose: to finish what they started. The hover truck slid to a stop at one of the far bays near the perimeter wall. Cargo containers loomed in neat rows, and the air smelled of fuel and Durasteel. Marin jumped down carefully just as Stefan cut the repulsors and climbed out from the cab. She stood a little straighter when she saw the ship. A freight hauler from another age, its design almost skeletal with stacked containers lining a central spine. It looked old, but reliable. Real. And beside it, pacing beneath the engine pylons, was a gray-haired spacer in a work-stained jumpsuit and a scowl like he was born with it. "About time you got here," the man growled, topping something into his datapad before shoving it into his pocket. "Any later and I'd have left your sorry hides here to hitch with the next rust bucket heading for the rim." Marin tilted her head, but said nothing. She didn't bristle, not this time. The weariness hadn't dulled her edge, but it had tempered it. She waited until Stefan walked up and clasped arms with the man before stepping forward herself. "Marin Durza," she said evenly, extending her left hand in Mandalorian fashion. The spacer blinked, then they gave her a lopsided grin and returned the gesture. "Well, well, you're not what I expected. About the spine, at least. Come on, let's see if you're good for more than posture." He waved a hand toward the lift nestled against the lower containers. "I've got the clamps to inspect before we break orbit. Anyone who wants to learn is welcome to tag along. The lower deck bunks are open." Actually pause and do some more eye drops. So give me just a minute, guys. I'll be right back. So sorry about that. I don't usually have to do them twice in one evening. Kind of unusual. Maybe it's because it's so hot. It has been kind of ridiculous here the last few days. Like in the 90s. So maybe that has something to do with it. Marin glanced at Stefan. He arched a brow, silently offering her the choice. "Better to be doing something," she muttered, and then passed the grav locker tether to him and followed the spacer toward the lift. Jared gave a small huff of amusement and nudged Aran with his elbow. "I give her 10 minutes before she's got that man teaching her how to override the nav safeties." 10? Aran replied deadpan. "That long?" They followed behind, the subtle tension between them all tempered by motion, action, and purpose. Sorry. They didn't quite take, I guess. Soon they'd be in the void again, heading for Korriban. By the time Marin had returned to the lower deck, the hum of the engines had shifted into a steady vibration beneath her boots. She ducked under a low bulkhead and keyed open the narrow berth that had been assigned to her. The space was just large enough for a bunk, a collapsible shelf, and the wall-mounted anchor rail where Stefan had already helped maglock her trunk. Her locker clicked quietly as she checked the seal. The green armor inside bore a matte finish, repainted by her own hands. Beside it sat the plain hilt of her new lightsaber, orange-bladed. No etchings, no flourishes. The saber of someone with nothing to prove. Only something to finish. Goodness, sorry. I don't know. And my eyes are burning. Across the corridor, she heard Aran's low murmur as he organized his own gear. He'd repainted his plates, subdued grays and slate green. His rifle case was already stowed beneath the bunk. When she passed his berth, their eyes met for a second. Everything holding? He asked softly, voice low over the engine drum. Aye, she replied. Feathers locked, nothing rattling. He gave her a slight nod and then returned to tightening the straps on his harness. No more words were needed. Marin climbed the ladder to the main deck, brushing her palm against the bulkhead as she passed. The texture grounded her, reminded her she was real, that this was real. Sorry. I don't know why my eyes are burning so bad. Goodness, sorry. I literally just did eye drops for that reason. Sorry. By the time she reached the cockpit once more, the planet was already falling away behind them, blue and green and fading beneath the curve of the upper atmosphere. She rechecked her crash webbing and sat back, exhaling slowly. The spacer glanced over. Ready for the nav programming, Marin picked up the leather-bound book and found the tabbed page. 4-lane blue, Catan sector, coordinates 315 by 90. Good, he said, entering the values and nodding to himself. The outer marker is 15 minutes out, plenty of time. Behind them, Jared entered the cockpit and leaned against the frame of the hatch. His arms were crossed, but his expression had softened. You're settling in, he said. Marin looked up and gave him a faint smile. For now. She's got that pilot's gleam in her eyes, the spacer muttered under his breath. Should have signed on as a hauler, girl. Would have saved you a lot of trouble. Jared chuckled quietly. Not her style, he said. She was raised to fly with purpose. Marin didn't reply. She turned back to the viewport, her eyes watching the dark deepen beyond the hull. Somewhere ahead was Korriban, Renius, the girl. Whatever else waited there. We'll bring them home, she whispered. From beside her, Jared reached out just once and rested his fingers over hers. Together. Goodness, sorry. Later, beyond Catan's gravity well, Marin braced against the seat as the freighter surged into hyperspace, stars streaking past before resolving into the fluid darkness of the hyperlane. The vibrations of the hull eased, replaced by the deep hum of the drive chamber. Silence lingered for a time, broken only by the steady pulsing of indicator lights along the console. Then, softly, she said, You know, this brings back memories. My father, he taught me to fly in the Trasinia, not long after he brought me in. The spacer leaned back in his chair, tilting his head slightly. Brought you in? She hesitated. Didn't know my parents. Not really. I was living on the streets of Coronet, stealing to survive. Thought I'd scored something big when I snuck aboard an old freighter at the docks. A YT 1930, matte gray with heat-scored plating. His brow lifted faintly. I tried to steal his ration packs, he admitted with a small, humorless laugh. Pulled a knife when he caught me. Snapped it against his armor. He chuckled. Let me guess. He didn't throw you to the garrison. No. Her voice dropped, almost reverent. He offered me a choice. Stay and learn, or go and keep running. She traced the edge of her sleeve unconsciously. I stayed. He gave me his name. Durza. The spacer exhaled slowly and looked over at her again. Darius Durza. She turned her head, her gaze suddenly wary. You do know the name. I remember a job run out past Terrace, he said, pointing faintly at the hyperspace swirls beyond the cockpit. Ship needed parts, my client needed protection. Durza showed up asking for nothing but time and a way off-world after a deal went sideways. Marin blinked. He never talked much about before me. He wasn't the sort who liked being known, the spacer replied, but I remember his eyes and the way he watched her back without ever having to say a word. Quiet loyalty, hard to forget. Marin smiled faintly. Yeah, that was him. They sat in silence for a time. Finally, she pulled a small holo projector from her pocket again. She activated it, letting the image hover between them, the two of them in katana tunics, her much younger, barefoot on a warm stone path. Darius had his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Her hair was uncombed, but her eyes had fire in them. He was the only family I ever had, she murmured, and I wasn't an easy child. You learned to fly, the spacer said, nodding at the image. I learned to fight first, he replied, with a hint of dry amusement. Flying came later. The Jedi came after that. The spacer leaned forward to rest his arms on the console. You've got pieces from every life in you. That's rare. Proving valuable, if you ask me. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked back at the stars streaming past them. Her voice was low when she finally spoke again. I'm not sure what I am now, but I know what I have to do. The spacer didn't push. He pulled down the panel of monitors again and gestured to the second screen. This corridor here, you ever need to think, stretch your legs? Best place on the ship. Just watch your step. Gravity plating there's old. Marin smiled faintly. Noted. As the ship rumbled on, Jared's quiet footsteps sounded on the ladder behind them. Marin glanced over her shoulder as he entered the cockpit, calm but alert. Everything good? He asked, eyes flicking between them. Clear flight path. No sign of pursuit. Be steady, Spacer said. Jared's eyes lingered on Marin for a beat longer than necessary. She gave him a slight nod and then turned her gaze forward again. Outside, hyperspace held its course, and for now, just for now, there was peace before the storm. The spinal corridor of the freighter was dim and quiet. The only sound was a low hum through the bulkheads. Marin stood near the midpoint junction, a hand braced against the wall, her breath steady, but her thoughts anything but. Her orange-bladed saber rested at her hip, clipped securely, its plain hilt cold against her side. The saber she'd built after the ambush, after the chapel, after the cables, the shuriken, pain. After Iran, Ethan and Jared had carried her home. She didn't hear Jared approach, but she felt him. The subtle shift in the force, his steadiness. You always do this, he said softly, stopping beside her. Do what? Disappear to the farthest part of the ship. Marin gave a soft, dry huff. Not as easy as it used to be. His eyes dropped briefly to the brace on her left knee. No, it's not. She rested her weight against the bulkhead. I was thinking about what I built, what I lost, about him. Jarius? She nodded once, her gaze distant. He never built a saber, said he didn't deserve it, after what he did after she died. Jared waited. Marin's voice was low. I think he was trying to make up for it, all of it, by raising me. We don't owe him perfection, Marika. I know. I want to honor the things he didn't get to finish. She looked down at her saber. I kept it plain. No etchings, no sigil, just something that works, something that feels like me. Jared nodded quietly. It does. Corridor light shifted slightly, casting shadows that moved. Presence near the bulkhead. Iran leaned against its frame, his arms crossed, watching them in silence. You planning to vanish before hyperspace again? He asked, his voice mild. Marin arched a brow. No, just needed to stand. Iran's eyes flicked down to her knee. You should be careful. I am careful. You're also stubborn, he muttered. You remember the first time we met? Jared gave him a sidelong look, amused. You mean when we walked straight up to her and surrendered? I meant after that, Iran said, and his tone softened slightly. When you came down to see me, brought food, asked if I wanted a second chance. Marin said nothing for a moment, and then quietly, You'd thrown your sigil at the force field, that you didn't belong anywhere. And you said that that wasn't my call to make alone. He looked at him, meeting his gaze. It still isn't. The three of them stood in a rare stillness, a quiet circle of understanding forged through blood, silence, and second chances. Mern straightened. I'll sleep later, once they're safe. Then we're with you, Ren said. All the way. Jared offered a quiet nod. Always. They turned back towards the main corridor, 3 figures, different legacies, one path. And that is the end of chapter 25, my friends. And it is 9:55, so that was actually well timed. I am going to take a second and see if there is anybody that we can go say hi to for the end of our stream. Wait just a second while I take a look. Hope everybody enjoyed the story this evening. We will have 3 more chapters left to finish at our next Storytime stream, which will be 2 weeks from now. That would be the 27th, actually. Hi, Lord. Thank you for the love. Yep, so we will be reading again in 2 weeks. And we will be finishing out the last 3 chapters of War Heart. And next Wednesday, we will be playing some SWTOR. Our usual shenanigans. Probably flashpoints. Hopefully they have fixed things by then. Supposedly they have. When we were playing on Tuesday, it was bad. It was really bad. They broke stuff. Let's just leave it at that. They broke a lot of things. Seeing if there's somebody that we can go say hi to. That maybe we haven't before. Or haven't. You know what? Yeah. If we're gonna go say hi to you. Alright, friends, we are gonna go say hi to a good friend of mine who's also a fellow streamer. Goes by Mad Viking King. It's pretty fabulous. Really awesome creator who is a Viking and plays all kinds of games and is just really, really all around awesome and really supportive. He is currently playing as Cyberpunk 2077. So we are going to go say hi. If you guys need to raid and run, that's okay. But please stick around for the raid and help share the love and our chill vibes. And I hope that you guys have a good rest of your week. I know that for some of you it's been kind of rough. Hope that the rest of the week goes well and they're able to get done the things that you need to. And please remember to take time for yourselves. That's the most important thing. Get some rest. Make sure you're eating, getting all the water you can. And if you have meds, make sure you take those. They're important. I forget that sometimes. I will check that out here in a minute. Thank you. I'm gonna get this raid going here. Just hang out for just a minute. Just a second. Well, set this up here. Goodness. Stuff's like not loading. Oh, goodness. So sorry, guys. Being really slow. Let's see. Oh, I'm trying to raid. It's being really slow for whatever reason. I think Twitch is being slow. There we go. Is anybody else having issues with Twitch being like super slow? Oh my goodness. Yeah. Having all kinds of issues with Twitch right now. Anyway, and now that that actually loaded the way it should, I'm gonna get this raid going. Once again, thank you everybody for being here. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story time, and hope to see you again next Wednesday for some SWTOR shenanigans. And I hope to see you all in 2 weeks for the end of Warrior's Heart. Thanks, guys. Have an awesome night, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.